Hi, everybody. Welcome to the City of Wheat Ridge Planning Commission for June 19th, 2014. Before I call the meeting to order, please put your phones on vibrate or mute or whatever you want to do out there. Thank you. So I call the meeting to order. May I have a roll call of the members?
Ann Brinkman.
Present.
Alan Bucknam.
Present.
Emery Dorsey. Present. Scott Ohm.
Here.
Steve Timms.
Here.
Amanda Weaver.
Here.
And let the record show Silka Pop is absent.
Thank you. May we have a pledge of allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So let me just tell you, I'm going to be going through this agenda. I'll try to explain what's going on as we go through. And there are copies of it back there, so just sort of follow along. I am asking for approval of the order of tonight's agenda.
Move to approve the order of the agenda.
I'll second that.
Please vote.
And that motion carries. Sorry. That motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. May we have approval of the minutes of May 19th, 15th, 2014.
I move to approve the minutes from May 15th.
Second.
Please vote.
That motion carries 4-0 with Commissioners Weaver and Timms abstaining.
Thank you. So now is the time for public forum. This is the time for any person to speak on any subject not appearing on the agenda. So nobody signed up, but is there anybody to speak on any topic at all that's not on tonight's agenda? Okay, I'm going to move on to the public hearing. The first hearing is case number WZ-14-06, a request filed by Callier Capital, LLC, for approval of a zone change from residential 2 to planned residential development, PRD, with an outline development plan, ODP, for property located at 7671 West 32nd Avenue and 3299 Wadsworth Boulevard.
Good evening. For the record, Meredith Reckert, Wheat Ridge Community Development Department, City of Wheat Ridge. Before I get started, I would like to introduce Ken Johnstone, Director of Community Development, who's at the staff table as well. Case number WZ-14-04 is a request for approval of a zone change from residential 2 to planned residential development. There are 2 addresses for this property, 7671 West 32nd and 3299 Wadsworth. The property is zoned R2. I would like to enter into the record the comprehensive plan, the zoning ordinance, case file and packet materials, and the contents of this digital presentation.
With one change, Meredith, you said WZ-14-04, and it's really
I'm
06.
sorry, and that's wrong on the screen too.
Okay.
1406. Sorry
Okay.
about that. All notification and posting requirements have been met. Therefore, Commission does have jurisdiction to hear this case. So before I get started with the nuts and bolts of what the proposal is, I wanted to talk just a little bit about our plan development process. We haven't seen one of these for a while, and so I thought it would help be a little refresher in addition to letting the audience kind of know what the process is. So the city's plan development process is a 2-step process. The first step is for the zone change. And in this case, it's to planned residential development and for approval of an outline development plan. Now, the ODP document sets the allowed uses and development standards for the property. It usually also is accompanied by a general layout for the site that shows general areas of access, street improvements, landscaping, and so on. The ODP process, which is a zone change, requires a pre-application neighborhood meeting and public hearings in front of both Planning Commission and City Council. Planning Commission is making a recommendation. City Council will be the final authority for approval of the zone change in ODP. Now, if the zone change is approved, prior to any construction on the property, there's one more step, and that's called the specific development plan, and that is usually accompanied by a plat document, which actually divides up the land. The intent of the specific development plan and plat is to focus on more of the details of the application, which includes final drainage, any sort of final traffic study, public improvement documents, also things like final architecture and so on. The SDP, which is short for Specific Development Plan, is reviewed only by Planning Commission. The plat, however, goes to Planning Commission and City Council, and there is no mandatory neighborhood meeting required. And so with that, let's get into the case. So this is a 2012 aerial photo of the property. You can see it's outlined in red, and north is to the top. The property is bounded generally by Wadsworth over here on the eastern side of the property, and then 32nd Avenue down to the south. There are two parcels that are involved. Both of those have unusual shapes to them, and both have vacant houses that are located on them that were built in the early 30s. The total size of the two sites combined is 3.4 acres. The piece on the west, which is 7671, as you can see from the configuration, is long and narrow. It's got about 110 feet of street frontage on 32nd Avenue. The other parcel, which is the larger piece, addressed as 3299, is basically a flag lot that abuts the other property at the northeast corner. And it has an irregular shape and has also got an angled northern property line, which designates the boundary of the Rocky Mountain Ditch, which is directly to the north. It also has this little appendage that sticks out over to Wadsworth. That's about 60 feet in width. And the property is heavily wooded, but a lot of the trees are what city would consider somewhat undesirable, being cottonwoods and elm suckers. This is the same aerial photo. Again, the north is to the top, and what the different colors stand for are the zonings that are around the property. Again, property is outlined in red. And we do have a variety of land uses in zonings surrounding. To the west are parcels, also zoned R2, which are primarily single and two-family dwellings. And you can see how Yarrow Street kind of snakes up over to the west, and that's that line of houses. To the southeast at 32nd and Wadsworth are two apartment complexes, and those are zoned R3. And then to the north, we've got Rocky Mountain Ditch, but beyond that, we've also got R2 and R3 zoning with multifamily. And then to the south is unincorporated Jefferson County and part of the Crown Hill Cemetery property. This particular property was subject to a zoning case back in, 2005. Case number WZ0513 was a request by the Jefferson County Housing Authority for a zone change to plan development for construction of 42 multifamily units in a series of buildings throughout the property. We did go to Planning Commission, and Planning Commission did get a recommendation of denial for that case, and the application was subsequently subsequently withdrawn and did not proceed to City Council hearing, so there was no final action. Zoning on the property remains R2. Let's take to look at some slides. Now, this was a hard site for me to get to just because of the nature of it. It was fenced off. It was, it's really wooded. I kind of didn't want to go on it. So I have some pictures that the developer took, and then some that I took from the street views. So this first slide is looking at the piece that extends down to 32nd Avenue. I was standing on the south side of 32nd looking north towards the property frontage. This is one of the houses on the property. This is looking west along 32nd Avenue, and you can see I pointed out where the property frontage is basically where you can see the sidewalk that stops. This is looking east, looking from 32nd Avenue. And I'm I've got this wrong too, I apologize, on my labels. This is looking east towards the 32nd and Wadsworth intersection. Here I am on the eastern side of Wadsworth. Now I'm looking west, again to the property frontage. This little piece right here is what I call the appendage that extends out to Wadsworth. These were some of the developers, or the applicants' photos, and these are of the interiors of the site. You can see some of the, trees that are on the property. Another shot of the interior of the site. This is a close-up view of the house on the eastern property, which is the Wadsworth piece. And then this is a different shot of the house on the western property, which is the 32nd Avenue piece. So, again, this is for approval of a zone change with an outline development plan. The outline development plan in this case contains 2 sheets. Sheet 1 of the ODP is what I like to call the declaration sheet. It has sort of the boilerplate stuff on it that we always require, the legal description, all the signature blocks, and so on. And it also includes the allowed uses and development standards for the property. So, having said that, the current zoning on the property is R2, which allows single or 2-family dwellings. The proposed uses on this ODP document are limited to single-family homes, in-home businesses, household pets. There is a restriction due to the configuration and the size of the lots, which prohibits RV and boat parking, and also detached accessory structures are not permitted. Again, the development standards on this dictate the standards for the lots if they are eventually subdivided. And I would point out that this is more of an urban type of design than we see in a lot of areas in Wheat Ridge. It's more urban in character. It has smaller lots, higher density. So the minimum lot sizes are set at 3,500 square feet of area with 50 feet of lot width. And then again, because of the small size of the lots, the setbacks are smaller as well. Front and rear yard setbacks will be 10 feet in depth, with a minimum of let me correct this. Front setbacks are 15 feet, side setbacks are 5 feet, rear setbacks are 15 feet. Per the front page, maximum building coverage is 40% of the lot. And I just did a quick calculation. If we had the minimum lot size, which is 3,500, and we did the math, that would end up being a maximum of a 1,400 square foot footprint on the 3,500 square foot lot. Maximum building height allowed is 35 feet, which is consistent with other residential zone district classifications in the city. I do apologize for the clarity on this slide. Are you having a hard time seeing it on your screen? You are? Okay. I apologize. So this is the second page of the ODP document. And again, it shows the tentative layout. The orientation on this is a little bit different, so let me walk you through this. 32nd Avenue, well, north would be to the right-hand side. So 32nd Avenue is down here. Wadsworth is over here at the bottom, and then this is the Rocky Mountain Ditch. So again, 32nd, the cul-de-sac comes in and dead ends at the north end of the site. So each of the homes will have a 2-car garage via shared driveways. There is a detail that's included down in the left-hand corner of the sheet that shows how that paired driveway will work. Access is gained from a single cul-de-sac bulb which extends north from 32nd Avenue. The southern portion of the street, due to the narrow lot width at this location, will have a detached sidewalk and tree lawn on the western side with no parking. The eastern side will just have curb and gutter with a 5-foot landscape buffer, but parking will be allowed. After the street sort of bends around to the northern portion, the right-of-way width does increase. Both sides of the street will have curb and gutter with a 5-foot tree lawn and detached walk, and parking on both sides of the street. Wheat Ridge Fire District has looked at this design. and they have approved it. We actually work very closely with them to try to amend our regulations to meet not only the city needs for right-of-way parking and so on, but also for them, for their accessibility. Public Works has reviewed and approved a preliminary drainage plan, and the lot is flat, and essentially the water will be dispersed to 3 different areas. The water on the south side goes to a pond down here near 32nd Avenue. The water going to the north is in a pond at this location. And then on the appendage that extends over to Wadsworth, we also have a small pond. There is some excess room here. We do have to provide an area for water line looping, but there is some excess ground which the developer is hoping can be turned into an on-site amenity such as a community garden. Let's see. All of these tracts would be maintained by the homeowners association. So again, you can see the way the lots lay out. On the south side, we have lots only on one side of the street. They are a little more square in size. They don't have quite the depth as the other ones, but they're a little bit wider as well. And when we get into the northern portion, the lots spread out a little bit. The largest lot is up here, which is lot 14, which I believe is at about 7,000 square feet. The smallest lots are those on the southern portion, and they're just a little bit over 3,500 square feet. This is an exhibit that depicts the architectural flavor of what's being proposed. They have proposed 2-story and raised ranch homes with front porches in sort of a cottage style. They have talked about design concepts, including covered front porches, trim detail, brackets, corbels, and other architectural features which will add interest to the homes. Materials are primarily painted lap siding. Staff did make a recommendation that we'd like to see some masonry incorporated into the plans. I know it's a little bit difficult sometimes when you do have front porches, but the recommendation is that we would have at least 50% of some sort of masonry on the front facade. And at the time of specific development plan, we'll hammer out the details regarding the specific architecture for the homes. There's been a lot of talk about density on this property through the years. So I tried to put together a little exhibit that shows what's being proposed and how it relates to the surrounding area. Again, the property is outlined in red, and the numbers for this particular development, if we're talking about gross density, which means it's just the land area and the number of lots, is right at about 5.75. If we subtract the right-of-way out of it, the net density increases to 8.73. As I indicated previously, the existing neighborhood does contain a mix of not only housing types, but also residential densities. And let's see, let me just walk you through this. So the apartment complex that's directly to the south, it's owned by Jefferson County Housing Authority, and it has a density of 18 dwelling units per acre. Just to the south of that, directly on 32nd, is what I would call a C court, which is older construction, probably done in the early 60s, and it is higher in density at 21.4 dwelling units per acre. If we skip up here to the north, across the Rocky Mountain Ditch, there's additional multifamily development right at about 23, a little bit less than 23 dwelling units per acre. Now, the single-family and two-family lots that abut the property directly to the west, of course, are zoned R2. Typically, the R2 zone district kind of depends on what the mix of the housing types are, but it can vary from 4.84 dwelling units per acre up to 6.9, and again, depending on the mix of single-family and two-family development. Based on the numbers that we're looking at, staff has concluded that the proposed density does provide a logical land use transition between Wadsworth, the higher density developments sort of to the south and north, and the low-density neighborhood to the west. Okay, guiding documents. Anytime we look at land use proposals, one of the first things we do is to go into the city's adopted regulations and guiding documents. And I've got 3 of those here that I'm referencing. The first one is the Neighborhood Revitalization Strategy, which was approved in 2005. And it identified sort of broad goals for the city to become a community of choice. It established goals for Wheat Ridge to be competitive with adjacent jurisdictions by upgrading the housing stock, increasing the variety of housing stock available, targeting underutilized properties for development, and redevelopment of the Wadsworth Corridor. The second document is the Wadsworth Corridor Plan. The property in this plan is shown as medium-high density residential development. It goes on to further define that particular classification as having 10 to 21 units per acre. It also calls for a gradual increase in density as we get closer to Wadsworth, and less dense as we get further away from Wadsworth to the west. Calls for preservation and enhancement of the residential neighborhoods to the east and west of the corridor, and increased pedestrian opportunity. And finally, we get to Envision Wheat Ridge, which of course is the city's comprehensive plan. The property on this particular plan is shown as a neighborhood buffer, and that designation is for buffering and transition between low-intensity residential uses in areas and higher-intensity commercial corridors. And some of the goals that are identified for neighborhood buffer areas include increasing housing options, promoting strong households, encouraging new housing types, improvement of underutilized properties, promoting pedestrian connections, and so on. We did put this application and proposal out for review by all the impacted agencies, and they did all indicate, of course, because the property is currently vacant, that there would have to be improvements installed at the expense of the developer in order to actually start development on the site. Consolidated Mutual Water indicated that they can serve the property subject to improvements, and that they're requiring a looped system, water line system, so the paved connection over to Wadsworth will provide that looping opportunity. Wheat Ridge Fire District can serve the property. They're going to require a water plan and hydrant locations at the time of specific development plan and plat. And based on the street widths and the turning radius on the cul-de-sac bulb, they have indicated they do not need a secondary access into the development. Wheat Ridge Parks and Rec has indicated that they'll require fees in lieu of land dedication at the time of plat. Wheat Ridge Police can serve. Public Works has reviewed and approved preliminary drainage design and a traffic study, and have concluded that all requirements have been met. Wheat Ridge Sanitation has adequate capacity to accommodate it, and then again, final design review will occur at the time of specific development plan and plat. So, having said all that, the final thing that staff does when we analyze particularly a zone change request is look at specific criteria that's located in Chapter 26. And based on that criteria and our review of that, we've concluded the following. First of all, that the zone change will be beneficial to the area. Not only will it increase property taxes for property values for adjacent properties, but will also eliminate what's been sort of an unmaintained or lack of maintenance on the property. We've concluded that all utility agencies can serve with improvements at the developer's expense. We've concluded that the city's guiding documents, including the NRS, the Wadsworth Corridor Plan, and Envision Wheat Ridge, support the housing type and the density being proposed. We've also concluded that the proximity to Wadsworth, the property is not really desirable for low-density residential development, and that it does provide a land use transition. And finally, that all evaluation criteria support approval of the request. We did place, let's see, I believe 4 conditions. The first one talks a little bit about the front facades having masonry material that at the time of SDP architectural design be hammered down. That the schematic detail for lots 7 to 20 be revised on sheet 2. And that finally, the developer is encouraged to save as many healthy, mature trees as possible. So that would conclude my staff report, and I'd love to answer questions if you have some.
Okay, so before we start, so here's what the process is going to be tonight. First, the Planning Commission asks questions of the staff, and when that's complete, the applicant will come up and give a presentation or simply answer questions, whatever they want. Well, they'll answer questions, but they can have a presentation ahead of that. Then we go back, and then the Planning Commission asks them questions. And then we go back to staff, then we go back to the public, and the public will take your comments. You'll give your comments to the Planning Commission, not to the applicant. And then after that, we go back to the applicant and ask him to address any questions that were raised by the public or raised through questions with staff. And then when we're all done with that, I close the public hearing. There's a discussion. Well, there's a vote, then a discussion. No, there's a motion, then a discussion, then the vote. Sorry. Okay, so I'll walk you through, but you will have a chance to speak. If you signed up, if you haven't signed up, at the end I ask you anybody if they want to speak. Okay? So thank you. So, Alan.
Thanks for the presentation. I guess just one point of clarification, Meredith, you mentioned that the documentation you had on setbacks, front setbacks, was in error. You said it wasn't 10, it was 15. I do see on the second page of the document here for the ODP, it does indicate a 10-foot setback. So can you clarify for us which is correct?
Okay. And I don't have the document in front of me. My recollection was, and we really had a lot of discussion about what those setbacks should be. We changed them several times to accommodate the street layout. So the front setback is set for 10 feet, 5 feet on the sides, and I believe 15 on the rear.
That's what I
that
see
right?
on the document here.
Okay.
I just wanted to make
That's
sure
correct.
we understood what you were saying. Okay. Let's see, the question. One more question, I think. As far as the lot that's sort of to the northeast of these two, that's to the north of the flag on Wadsworth.
Okay, this one right here?
No, actually to the north of what's in the ODP, or to the northeast of what's in the ODP, to the north of the flag, of the, I guess, the pole on the flag, I should say.
So I think it's this one you're...
No, not part of the ODP.
Oh, okay, sorry.
What's the current status of that property? Is it occupied? Is it vacant? Is there a structure on it?
I believe the existing house is on that, and they're shaking their heads no.
No, there are two existing structures on these two separate lots.
Right.
It was hard to see in the aerial if there was anything evident on this, just off the property here to the northeast.
I don't believe there is. I was able to take a picture, but you couldn't really see it, which is why I used the applicant's picture.
So it's currently vacant? Yes. Okay. Is the city aware of any other development plans forthcoming for that particular lot? Okay. That's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you. Amanda, please. No. Mr. Dorsey.
I have a couple of questions. Basically, we don't have a street in this into here at this particular point, so this is going to be a new street. What are we going to call it?
Pardon me?
What is the name of the street?
Well, we haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay,
It-
just this,
It would have to follow the logical grid system. I believe Yarrow is the one over in the neighborhood. I'm sure will correct me if I'm not correct about that, but I believe the next adjacent neighborhood street is Yarrow, so it would maybe be Webb. I don't know. We will decide that at the time of plat.
okay. Second question, somewhere in the pages that I've been reading through, these were going to be more or less spec houses, or is this developer going to develop the whole thing at one time?
I will defer that to the applicant.
Okay. Third thing, you mentioned that we have parking. This is on the south entrance, parking only on one side of the street.
Correct.
So if I were to visit property number 2 there, I would park on the eastmost side of that street.
That's right.
Okay. But once you get into the to the cul-de-sac, you can park on both sides?
That's right.
Okay. For the minute, I think that answers my question.
Thank you. Steve, Tim's.
Good evening. Thank you for that presentation. Following up on that parking question for the street parking, so each lot is going to have a 2-car garage. They're going to have a shared access between 2 units. Has staff calculated approximately what potential parking is available on street with this development in terms of number of spaces approximately?
I haven't done that calculation. I would think, I mean, obviously, the lots are pretty narrow in width. So my guesstimate on the south side is there would probably, let's see, it's probably 6 spaces, 5 to 6 spaces on the south end. And then that broadens up into the northern portion, which obviously has parking on both sides. If you think about it, though, a shared drive and a 50-foot lot width and kind of do the math, I can say that the City of Wheat Ridge parking requirements require 2 off-site spaces if there is on-street parking, and they do meet that minimum.
There were a couple, I read the comments from the neighborhood meeting and the questions back from February, and I believe, it looks like you were there. There were a couple of discrepancies, or I guess changes, it appears, since that time, and I just wanted to confirm those and see what's correct.
Right. Well, my recollection is the lots that we talked about at the neighborhood meeting were bigger than what they were proposed today. I want to say in the 4,000, 4,500 square foot range. And obviously, as we started working on the engineering and the street layout, and then also accommodating the detention areas that are going to be required, those got smaller. So
Yeah, because the lot coverage was one issue, because in the notes it says the homes will be 1,500 to 2,000 square feet in size, and potentially now we're limiting them to 1,400 or maybe a little bit larger depending on the size. Has staff worked with the applicant to see if their proposed home models fit, I guess, within that 40%?
We have not gotten that far.
Okay.
I assume that's something they're on top of.
Okay, I'll ask them, that's fine. And then also in that meeting, there was a reference to the HOA. Applicants do not expect an HOA. However, in the staff report, it says that an HOA will be there.
They will be
confirm that?
required to have a homeowners association because of the 3 tracks
Right.
that'll have to be maintained.
In the past, Planning Commission, I think, has had a condition. I think we did that for maybe Incarnation, about that staff will have to review, and do you know what I'm referencing?
Yeah, and
Is that something that's done at the plat stage or the zoning stage, or?
It's really more of the SDP and plat
Okay.
in particular.
Okay. The 50% masonry requirement, and I can ask the applicant as well, are they on board with that? Their character of the neighborhood says there'll be either stone or brick accents, and 50% is sometimes a little bit more than an accent, perhaps.
Well, and This has been a consistent requirement that we've included with any of our new plan developments, that there at least be a little bit of masonry added in just to dress up the front facades. I mean, obviously, if you look at what's going on with the elevations they're showing here, where it becomes somewhat problematic is like when you've got like a Denver Square design where it's mostly porch in the front. A little bit easier to accomplish in this type of style. That might be something that they want to talk about. So I would address them and see
Okay.
what kind of response
Sounds good.
they have.
And then on sheet 1, under development standards, there's number 13, signage. All signage shall be in conformance except as follows. And there's a residential subdivision signs, maximum sign area 36 square feet. Is that what they're proposing? And if so, what is the standard that's being deviated from?
Well, really, and maybe we should have tightened up that note a little bit. Technically, the only signs that would be allowed in here besides like real estate
Right.
signs and construction signs would be a subdivision identification sign, which is a 36 square foot max. They also would be permitted with a home occupation to have like a 2 square foot shingle that could go out. So, we should probably take a look at the language. If you want, you could add that as a condition that we tighten up that note.
And then my final question deals with, and this is maybe a little premature, but condition, I believe, 4 deals with the tree preservation.
Yes.
So does Wheat Ridge have a tree preservation ordinance currently?
We do not.
And so we've talked that some of the trees, the majority of trees perhaps, are not the most desirable, but it's still staff's belief that to preserve those as much as possible.
Well, there's a couple nice cottonwoods on the site, and even though we don't allow new cottonwoods to be planted, it still would be nice to maintain sort of that woody character. I think anytime the more trees you have, kind of the more homey it feels. Obviously, there will be constraints with the construction, the placement of the homes, and so on and so forth. But where practical, we think that's a good condition.
How does staff intend to review or require or oversee that condition?
They did give us a preliminary tree assessment. I have reviewed it, and I think what we'll probably do is engage the help of the city forester or the parks naturalist and have her maybe give some suggestions about what we'd like to see, kind of based on what they did preliminarily.
Okay. And then finally, since the public notice went into effect, the property was posted, et cetera, has staff received any additional emails or phone calls or anything from the public?
I have not. I
Okay.
did receive 2 inquiries from folks who live directly to the west. I emailed staff reports out, and then, of course, we always have our staff reports available on the city's website as well.
Great. No more questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott Ohm?
Hi, I have a couple of questions and a comment. The first one's a comment on the condition number 4. Cottonwoods are typically weak wood. They typically are forbidden in most city municipalities. The roots, I have a neighbor, the roots are upheaving the sidewalk and the asphalt. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that I think it's going to be a good fit for this project. The only place that I would see that they would possibly go would be in the detention, but they're going to be cutting the grade. A lot of municipalities don't like the cottonwoods because they tend to suck up a lot of water. They're really heavy water users, and the female cottonwoods produce a lot of cotton. I kind of feel that it's strong. It might be a little too strong language to say that you're encouraging. I understand the intent that you want to try to save the trees, but I just don't think the cottonwood is going to be the right fit for what they're doing. And if anything, I would reword it to say that the developer will perform a tree assessment with the city's forester. Like I said, I'm just not sure that the cottonwood is going to be worth trying to save for what's going on here. So that's my comment. And then I have some questions on the access. I totally understand the not having any vehicle access on Wadsworth. I understand and I get that. But the one question I have is, Was there any consideration for some type of pedestrian access to connect to Wadsworth?
Well, okay, so again, here is the layout. This is what I'm calling the appendage that extends to Wadsworth. In order to meet the requirements of Denver Water and Consolidated Mutual, the southern 30 feet is supposed to be paved, which will then in de facto act as a pedestrian link
Okay.
over to Wadsworth.
Is there going to be any type of gate so vehicles don't, or barrier or something, or barricade? Or?
I would think there would be some sort of barrier put up,
Okay.
so that doesn't happen, obviously.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
So I have go ahead, please.
I think Amanda's got one too. Just to talk a little bit more about what Commissioner Timms was saying there with the street width on that southern bit, and the lack of a sidewalk on that eastern side. It's my understanding on that eastern side is there's already that residential development there.
Correct.
On the north end, and then another one sort of to the south of that as well. I'm a big fan of pedestrian access all the way through these types of developments. Someone's coming home from school or walking home from work, or say maybe parked on the east side. It would be nice to have some sort of sidewalk as opposed to just a curb, and then that 5-foot landscape buffer there, meeting the curb. Was there any discussion between staff and the applicant on making the lots to the west slightly shallower in depth to give a little more space to the sidewalks, so you could have sidewalks on both sides of the street?
If we were to, so essentially, Mr. Bucknam, you're saying widen it out on this side and, sort of scoot the street over a little bit so there's more room?
Yeah, the audience and the people at home probably can't see it on this schematic, but there's a sidewalk that starts on the southwest end of this development. It goes up north and snakes around, goes around the cul-de-sac, snakes across the east side, and then when it gets back to that last turn, goes from westbound to southbound on the east side of the street. The sidewalk just disappears. There's no sidewalk there. So it's that area where there's no sidewalk on that southern end of the street that I'm concerned about.
So in order to widen the right-of-way at this location, it's going to, these 5 first lots, I believe, are right at the minimum of 3,519 square feet. So we'd probably be talking a reduction in the number of lots on that side.
Okay, thank you.
Amanda, please. Weaver?
I just had a further question about the first condition, about the 50 feet of front facade has to be masonry or brick. Sure. I'm just a little confused on that because I'm looking at could you turn back to the elevation? I'm looking at those houses, and I live in a 100-year-old house that's very similar to one of these, and it doesn't have any mason facade. And I'm also sort of thinking about, the pricing of the size of the lots, the size of the homes, and maybe we can discuss this
Sure.
with the commission. But can you give me the sort of compelling reason for that?
Just to upgrade the architecture a little bit, make it a little more aesthetically pleasing. Like I say, with some of the designs that are being shown here, if you think about it, well, we've got this front porch that extends all the way across, so where does the brick go? Up against the facade where nobody sees it? It's a good point.
Well, would those brick pillars of the porch, would that be 50 feet of?
It's 50% is that.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, so.
Yeah,
that
that
was
seems
a
like a
typographical
lot
error.
to me, because it almost feels like with 50%, you're sort of going into a whole different
Yeah,
look
and it's like,
of
we'll
architecture.
see it, so.
Yeah.
Again, I think that's something the applicant would like to discuss
Okay,
as well.
all right, thank you.
Emery?
I wanted to just get a little more clarification on the flagpole situation here. That 30-foot you said that that was going to be hard surface, or is that going to be grass?
Well, the flagpole is 60 feet wide, okay?
Right.
And the southern portion of that is going to be used for the water line looping into the development. And the requirements of both Denver Water and Consolidated Mutual are that you can have a 30-foot area or easement if it's paved. If it's unpaved, it has to be 50 feet. So that's why we've got the 30-foot wide piece that sticks out. This other northern portion of that, again, we're hoping that could be some sort of amenity for the community. But that's the rationale. It's a requirement from the Denver
So that
Water.
will have to be paved.
The southern half, yes, in order for the easement to be 30 feet wide.
So in essence, that could be pedestrian friendly.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I see. That's a sort of a strange rule to put pipes under paving, but other than that, it just, you know.
Does anybody have any more questions before I ask mine? Scott?
It's 50%. Thanks for pointing that out.
Okay, I have just a couple questions. So there are, since this is going to be a public right-of-way and not a private road, that means that under certain circumstances, the city will plow that?
We have a very specific plowing policy
Right.
that is in a hierarchy.
Right, is this at the lowest
I would
hierarchy?
think it would be low,
Okay, because there's no room to push any snow around in there.
into the pond.
Right, okay, okay. Speaking of, so this abuts Rocky Mountain Ditch.
Yes.
Can you confirm that there is no floodplain related to the Rocky Mountain Ditch related to these properties?
It's not.
Okay, good. And in this report, it talks about digging a pipe under the ditch, getting approval with, getting an agreement with the property owner to the north at the time of the SDP. Is that normal?
This site, it's a very difficult site.
Yeah.
For a variety of reasons. The configuration of the lots, for one thing, it's also very flat. And there was not a lot of room, considering what had to be accommodated as far as storm drainage and water quality features and detention. So this was a very unusual design. I don't know that I've ever seen this here in the city of Wheat Ridge. I'm sure it's done other places. And Mark Thornborough from Martin & Martin is here, who is the design engineer on the project, could probably address that a little bit more. It was their idea.
So here's my question from the city's perspective. Does that agreement go with the property or go with the owner?
It would go with both properties. If in order for this to develop to accommodate the current layout, they need that detention pond off-site. The cool thing is that the owner of that particular property, and let me go to the aerial and I'll show you, wait a minute. Okay, so north is to the top. Here's where the cul-de-sac bulb would be. It's this property owner down here, and he has some drainage issues on his property as well, which we believe that this improvement will not only benefit this, but it will also take care of some of his on-site problems. And again, I would let Mark address that more specifically.
But
But it would have to be easements on both.
but from a city perspective, if the property to the north ever sold,
It has to remain in perpetuity.
that's what I want to know. It has to remain in. Okay, and then, I guess that's it for now, I guess. Oh, and I just want to confirm, on this, page 2 of the report, at the bottom of the paragraph, just before says Exhibit 4 site photos, and it says the property is heavily wooded, but most of the trees are cottonwoods and Siberian elm suckers, which are species the city discourages.
Yes.
Okay, just checking. Okay, thank you. I wanted to clarify that. Okay, does anybody have any other questions?
One more question, and it's with reference to the south entrance into this, the road that's going in. And we talked about the sidewalk on the east side of the road, and it was brought up over here. Is there a reason that we have to have 6 houses or 6 properties, 6 lots across there? You couldn't do 5 and increase the size of that so you would have a sidewalk that would come out to 32nd Avenue?
Well, I think that is something you'd want to discuss with the applicant.
Okay, because I know that's 2 dwellings and it's a lot, so there's probably, economies of scale here, but it's one of these things that it would be nice, I think, to be able to have a sidewalk because that's a blind corner. You have some kids there crossing the street on a blind curve. That would be a dangerous situation, I think, as far as youngsters are concerned.
Okay, any other questions before we hear from the applicant? Thank you, Mary. So now is the time for the applicant. Not on mic, sorry. Now is the time for the applicant. Hi, do me a favor, please. Give your name, first name, last name, spell your last name, and then give an address, please.
My name is Bill Fritz, F-R-I-T-Z. My address, 10827 Bobcat Terrace, Littleton, Colorado, 80124.
So did you have a presentation, or did you just want to address questions, or how did you, what's your preference?
Basically do is introduce other people that can address the questions, because Meredith did such a great job presenting it. There's nothing really more I can say. Make a couple of quick comments. We've been working at this along with Meredith and her group for a little about a year now, going back and forth. And first starting off and, kind of thinking we're going to be able to get 27, 28 lots on this property, all single-family homes, all upscale, but then by the time we it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Good, it's good and bad. Less is good, but then less is more expensive. So we run into those problems trying to balance that out. But with Meredith's help and the other members of our group, which I have 2 other people here, we put together what we thought is a pretty good group to try to make this happen, and that is we hired Martin Martin as a partner, who's civil engineering, who has some experience with this because they were involved with it with Jeffco back in 05 and 06, and so they've been great in this. And also with Bob Nettleton, who is a custom home builder, has been in Denver for many years, semi-custom home builder. So what's nice about that is this is not a little tract builder coming in. We're a semi-custom type builder. So we're going to have the designs, but everybody's going to be able to have a little input on their house. So we're trying to make this as upscale as possible and as affordable as possible. So there's a balance between that. We like the idea. I mean, this has been a difficult piece of property to work with, as Meredith can address, and the other people too, because we did, like you mentioned, start off, we thought we were going to get 4,500 square foot lots, but then with talking with fire and water and everybody else, then they had to shrink down and shrink and shrink. But we still think our design with the urban design like you see out at Stapleton, out at Lowry, where you don't go into a neighborhood and see nothing but a sea of garages, because we do have parking that we've addressed to. That's why these great guys came up, and with Meredith came up with the idea, let's put the garages in the back, let's have shared driveways, let's have big front porches, let's make this a true upscale little neighborhood. And this is far past what I think Wheatridge really had when they said, well, we want this to be a transition piece. This is a nice product that we're putting in here. So basically, I'm kind of the sales and marketing side of this, and not so much the nuts and bolts of all this. So I think probably the best thing to do is turn it over to questions to Martin and Martin and the builder, and they can basically answer more of the specific questions of setbacks and anything else that you might require.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead.
I was just curious, what is the price point that you're hoping the range for these homes?
Well, when we first started off, we expected to be, we wanted to be a little below 300. Now, but again, this was about 18 months ago when we first started doing this. Development costs have shot up, much less construction costs. We still hope to be somewhere in our starting point, somewhere in lower 300s, 330, 340 stuff. But we're looking at ranch styles, raised ranches, story and a half, 2 stories, all basements, 9-foot basements that can be finished. So we expect to have, when they're all said and done, when people can come in and say, hey, this is what I want, we're expecting to get neighbors, from the Wheat Ridge area saying, hey, we want something new, but we don't want to be on our 12,000 square foot lot anymore. We want to kind of retire from yard work, but we want new and exciting, and that's to have that. We also expect to get the young professionals, whether they work at Lutheran or whether they just thinking, you know what, I want new, I want it nice, I want it affordable, and I want to go down to Lodo and to Highlands every weekend, and I can afford it. And I want a nice neighborhood. I want a family type neighborhood, so if I want to have some kids here, I can do it. I don't have to move again to have to do that.
Sure. And they're going to average around 1,500 square feet? Is that kind of what
I'm sorry, say again, please.
How many square feet are they going to average?
I would say, well, finished square feet, probably everything would be, finished square feet probably closer to 2,000 on the average, because of the 2 stories, if they finish off the basement. The ranches probably average. Finished square feet is going to be 1,500, 1,600 finished square feet on the average.
Thank you.
Alan?
Thanks. Just to talk a little bit more about this sort of the square footage side of things, and the as it relates to kind of the marketing of the development. I know every developer's a little different and maybe aiming for slightly different price points, market, and so forth. So I don't want to try and compare apples to oranges or anything when we look at maybe some other developments that are happening here in Wheat Ridge. I'm talking about square footage with the possibility of having that sidewalk completed all the way on that east side, and that would obviously require pushing lots 1 through 5 back a little bit, the frontage of it back, which would then make the lot smaller, which would then make the finished square footage smaller. I know that we have housing in development here, new housing in development that's in the sort of finished range of about 1,100 square feet, even on the small side. Is that size something that you can consider in terms of marketing to your audience, or is that just too small for who you're envisioning over here?
To us, that's way too small.
Okay.
I mean, we've already. Wheat Ridge has been kind enough to work with us on that street so that we only have parking on the one side, which is made. There are a couple of things that made this whole thing possible when we started getting into it. That was one of them, because we're buying this land from Jeffco, and when we looked at it first, we thought, okay, we put in a private drive, we do some other things, and we'll have 26, 28 lots. Well, now we're down to 20, and so our costs and everything goes up. But we still want to have a nice house. We want to get as much as we can, the most value to the people. So the smaller you get, the higher the square foot price goes up, and pretty soon it becomes, let's just move into the condo and forget about this. And so I don't, when you can ask Bob, the builder for here, you can ask him, see if he might have had a brainstorm here in the last few minutes that I don't know about. He might have something, might tell me I'm all wet. But I think we're about as small as we can really be and still make this viable.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Oh, yes.
I just have the question about the masonry condition. Are you aware of that condition and your thoughts on that?
We want to work with Wheat Ridge planning as much as we can. We think that we envisioned a cottage style, which doesn't make for a whole lot of masonry on it. There's some brick accents, some masonry. But we of course, and if we have to do all 50%, then the prices go up again. So we want to work with and make it work as best we can, even though that wasn't in our original design to have that much. We did expect to have some kind of brick or stone accents, especially on the pillars and stuff, because we want it to look right. But we also don't want to make the mistake of saying, oh, okay, we're meeting this 50%, and now all of a sudden it doesn't look like the design we want it to be. But so far, when we've had comments and questions with Wheat Ridge, we've never really had, we've always been able to solve it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so who would you like to introduce first?
Bob?
Okay.
Builder, and so you can ask more questions about the houses.
Okay, thank you. So Bob, first name, last name, address, spell your last name, please. And you can lift that microphone so it captures you. Perfect, thank you.
Bob Nettleton, N like Nancy, E-T-T-L-E-T-O-N, 220 South Cherry Street in Denver.
Thank you. So did you have a presentation, or you just want to answer
We're just
questions?
here to answer questions. I would like to expand a little bit on what Bill said about the masonry requirements. One of the members spoke toward that a little bit, that this is not an architecturally correct application of masonry in a cottage-style architecture. We pride ourselves in building architecturally correct houses and designing and building what we call four-sided architecture, where we just don't plant things on the front facade in order to meet some random requirement. So we have no problem with the masonry requirement, but we'd like to have the flexibility. As our little elevation show, one house has a masonry chimney, another house has a masonry surround on the porch. We don't have any problem putting the masonry product on the home, but we'd like to have some flexibility to do it in an architecturally correct manner, because I don't think anything looks worse than going in a tract subdivision and seeing every house has, brick and stone in the same place, because it's just a random application to meet a requirement. We're building a project in Littleton, and they've required that, and they've damaged the architecture of several of the houses.
Thank you. So, Alan?
Just again, I'm going to keep pounding this topic of the sidewalk. So forgive me. When you guys were plotting out the lots here, especially lots 1 through 6, if the goal is to maintain the housing at a particular square footage, is there any possibility to make those lots wider, make them less deep, but make them wider so as to have the same total square footage on each lot, which would then sacrifice that tract C somewhat, probably compromise it for the purposes of drainage, and then alter the drainage pattern so that maybe it went into a larger detention pond on tract A? Was there any?
We had multiple discussions about the detention basins. The site has some natural drainage flows where it flows to the north and flows to the south, so we can't really force the water to go uphill, so we're kind of forced into those 3 detention areas that are on the site because they kind of follow the natural drainage. We're kind of at cross purposes a little bit, because if we're trying to save trees, we need to minimize grading to work with the existing drainage on the site. I think there needs to be some clarity on the sidewalk. There is a 5-foot buffer from the side of the street to the property line there, and that was a specific request of when we worked with Meredith's crew. That creates a buffer between our project and the apartments, which is pretty heavily wooded right now. That 5-foot buffer could go away, and it can easily become a sidewalk, and I don't think that impacts the size of the lots at all. So there's a space there that could be a sidewalk. It's been chosen not to have a sidewalk, so there is a sidewalk obviously on the other side of the street. So if it's the commission's opinion that we need sidewalks on both sides of the street, that's something that we need to work with Meredith and her crew on, and get rid of the landscape buffer and make it a hard surface. So there's, again, that kind of cross purposes. What's more important, to have a soft landscape edge there between our project and the apartments, or whether to have pedestrian usage on each side of the street.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Amanda? Do you have any questions? Okay. Emery? Dorsey?
Back to that sidewalk thing. I mean, it's one of these things that if you took the 5-foot buffer, is there a fence that goes along there where the apartments, that back up to the apartments? Or is that just open, or what is that at this particular point?
There's no fence there. There might be an old farm fence there, an old wire fence and T-post that's kind of intertwined. There's a bunch of the elm trees that kind of go up that border.
Would it be possible then to put a fence as a barrier and then use that buffer as a sidewalk?
I don't see an issue with doing.
I mean, I'm just,
nice looking fence.
the big thing, yeah, and it would be attractive. I mean, it'd be, when is the decision on that going to be made, or how is that going to be made?
Well, what would be appropriate, if commission feels that way, would be to direct staff to work with the applicant before city council. I'm not sure there's enough room for a sidewalk and fence, and there's a grade change between, oh, I wish I had a pointer down here, between the C court and the property. I think, is there a retaining wall there, Mark? A little bit of grade. So I just don't think, to get an ADA sidewalk, we need 5 feet. I think it's almost putting 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound bag, perhaps. I mean, we can always take another look at it.
Is the feeling that the pedestrian access on the one side of the street is enough, or?
Well, my concern was where the sidewalk ends at the top of the flagpole there, and it just ends at the curve. And so you've got a sidewalk that goes all the way around the cul-de-sac and just ends, goes nowhere, and it's at a curve. We're looking at families in here and kids riding their bike or whatever. Trike, we'll say trike, or pulling a wagon or whatever on the sidewalk, and then all of a sudden it ends, they're going to be crossing that street. That's a blind corner. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say.
The other option we could look at is taking that sidewalk where it heads around that curve and focusing it more, because we have that 30-foot paved sidewalk, if you will, that goes out on the flag, so that becomes more of a terminus of the sidewalk, so it just doesn't end. So
Right.
It makes some sense at the end there. There could be some sort of differentiation in pavement type or something like that, where
Right, you could end the sidewalk at lot number 20 and just be done with it and not have it go on around the curve.
but we can look at that.
Okay.
Go through the process.
Well, I'd like to see you look at it, so.
And we were taken aback a little bit by the 30-foot paved easement too. It seems contrary to common sense for a water line.
Right.
Have to dig up the pavement to get to it.
Mr. Timms?
On that sidewalk issue, I'm looking at it, I think that the curve of the radii on the street there, it comes at basically at a tangent. I don't think there's room, as it's currently laid out, to extend that sidewalk around that curve without having to totally reconfigure and re-engineer the street. So I think that's even if we took out the landscaping, they're still not going to be able to connect. And so I think a better option may be just to snip it at that particular easement. But we can talk about that as later on.
Did you have any questions? Steve? Scott? Okay. So I just have a question just to follow up on that pipe that you're putting underneath the Rocky Mountain ditch. I'm not quite understanding how that, the city's explained that it must be maintained on the property if the property to the north ever sells. But how does that help this property draining onto their property? How does that help their property and their drainage issue?
We don't drain, and Mark can speak a little bit more we don't drain onto their property. We have a pipe that drains through their property, so there's an
Oh, okay.
that goes through their property, and then down to Wadsworth where there's a storm sewer inlet.
Oh, there is. Yes, I'm familiar with that storm sewer.
There's no other way to get the stormwater off the site because there are no storm sewer improvements on Wadsworth.
Got it.
Further south than that inlet. So what we're doing is taking our drainage underground to that inlet and
Now I understand.
cooperation with that owner who has serious water problems in that kind of corner to pick up his water and direct it to the inlet also.
Now I understand. I was thinking the pipe was ending on the property, but this is going straight through and picking up his as well. I get it now.
Pipe system, one system for us and one for his drainage.
I get it. Okay. And then just with regards to snow, because it does snow here in Wheat Ridge more often than elsewhere, where was the snow going to go?
Mark, you want to address that? He's more.
He's familiar with snow. Okay. Does anybody have any more questions? Okay. Thank you very much. First name, last name, address.
Mark Thornborough. My address is 6037 Cole Court, Arvada, Colorado.
Thank you.
So, I work for Martin & Martin Engineering, and we did the civil engineering for this project. And I'll try to answer the civil engineering sort of questions. With respect to the drainage pipe going to the north, we did work with the owners of Oak Hill Apartments, and we have a memo of understanding drafted, and we've discussed with them to create this drainage pipe going, as Bob said, through their property and then back to the east to an existing storm sewer in Wadsworth. We'll also install a second pipe adjacent to ours, which picks up all the downspouts from that apartment complex and takes it also out to the storm sewer in Wadsworth. So
Okay.
they have a long flat building and no drainage. They've done numerous repairs and they still have flooding problems. So that's the basis for the mutual agreement.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then snow?
Oh, and the snow, the detention pond will be located on the east side of the north end of that cul-de-sac. So the intention is that there'll be storm limits also down there on the end of the road, so they can push the snow down to the end of the cul-de-sac and into the detention pond. Or even if they leave it on the end of the detention pond, it will all still drain and melt back into the detention pond.
Okay, but you can't push anything into the Rocky Mountain ditch, correct?
No. Right. And that's been
Okay, because is it,
a lot of work to not get any of our stormwater into Rocky Mountain Ditch.
okay. Okay, great. While you were planning this out, did you anticipate, there's a path that goes along Rocky Mountain Ditch that I happen to take myself. Is there going to be a connection to that path at all? Unofficial, or official path?
unofficially-
Official path? No.
We did not talk to them about that, and in fact, I'm not sure if that is a publicly allowed path.
It isn't. It is not.
Right away for the ditch.
Okay.
We have spoken with Rocky Mountain Ditch Company, and there's some elements of right-of-way that they've given up,
Okay. But nothing official?
nothing official.
Okay, that's as far as I'll go. Ellen, did you have any questions?
One word, sidewalk. Just is there anything you can add to the conversation regarding that lack of sidewalk over there on the east side, down there on that southern access off of 32nd that we haven't already talked about?
No, I'd say it's purely a matter of property area, and those lots are already wider than they are, well, they're almost square in some areas, and so the typical geometry of a lot is sort of compromised as it is. Doesn't mean that you couldn't build on a shallower lot, but I would offer that we could put, say if we clip off the sidewalk at lot 20, or we could put a crosswalk across the road to the sidewalk on the other side. So that would, and a sign, let's say, so that would be a good way to get people back to the other side safely. The other question that was mentioned that I wanted to address was the number of parking stalls. And I did a little math based on a small scale version of the drawing, but I would venture to say that on the south portion of the road, we could probably have 10 parking spaces. What are the lot widths, 40, 50 feet?
55 feet.
50 feet, 55, okay, so in front of each, a typical parking stall is 18 feet long. So, but that would be a head-in parking space, so you need a little bit longer stall for parallel parking. But you could get on the order of 2 per lot, plus or minus. And then on the northern stretch, we could have roughly 10 on either side of the road without a problem too. So I think that's, there's more than one extra parking space per unit.
Okay, thanks.
Amanda? Emery?
No, I'm okay.
Steve? Scott? Oh, you have questions for staff. Okay, I think they're done. Thank you. So, should we ask staff questions now, or should we wait for let's hear from the citizens. Yeah. So, now's the time for the public to come up. So I have a list up here that I'm going to call from the top to the bottom. Okay. So after I call the names on the list, if you wish to speak and you haven't spoken, just one at a time, we'll have you come up. When you come up, if you don't mind, if you've heard, give your first name, your last name, spell your last name, and provide an address for us, especially if you live in the neighborhood so we can find you on the map. If somebody ahead of you has already spoken the same thoughts that you have and you don't wish to speak, you can stand up and say, my issues have been addressed or my issues have been voiced, okay? But you are obviously welcome to speak. So the first one on the list tonight is Pat Hott. Good evening. Hello. You can lower the mic. No. I'll give you that answer, no. But you could have spoken about that at the public hearing portion of this meeting. So you can come back on another meeting and speak to this group, okay?
Yeah, because it's not pedestrian friendly around here.
So come on back. Okay.
It's Pat Hott, H-O-T-T. I'm at 3330 Yarrow Street. And one of the things we talked about at the original meeting was the easement behind our homes. And if you guys had looked into that and what was talked about, or was that put in the plan?
So, hey, Pat, can I ask a question? So are you talking about the rear setbacks adjacent to the rear property line?
There's an easement, and I guess we're responsible for that property in our fencing.
There is a strip of land of unclear title that Dave Brossman just recently pointed out to us. This isn't a platting document, but it would be one of those situations where it would be desirable for the applicant to try to pick that up so that there wouldn't be a 5-foot strip of fence and fence with weeds in between. That was just recently brought to our attention, and I don't even know if we talked about it to the applicant.
Is it like a spite strip?
I don't think it's a spite strip. I think it's unclear title.
Oh, okay. For the
I don't think
entire
it was
length?
intentional. It's just the surveying starts from one place and another place. We have this in several areas in the city.
So should we make that a condition or a recommendation?
I think it's a plat issue, so.
Plat issue, okay.
I think we can, sounds like we're on top of it, at least preliminarily.
Thank you. Okay.
So I'm all in favor of the development. I think it'll increase the value. I'm just concerned with privacy there and how they decide what to do with the easement. And if the developers are going to put a new fence, to divide the new development and our old development there, if they had planned on doing that or discussed it. So that's a big concern for me,
Okay,
is cleaning up the connection of the new properties with the old properties.
okay.
So, and then I'm curious, there's a lot there I guess you couldn't acquire. It's empty, that runs along Wadsworth, and I was wondering what could happen there. Could it become commercial? Could it become residential? Is it going to be cleaned up, or?
Well, that's under separate ownership, and we did highly encourage the applicant to work with the property owner to incorporate this into the site. We have concerns from a staff level because it's zoned R2 and it's right at the crest of the hill. So access into it from Wadsworth is going to be tricky. And like I say, we encouraged the applicant. I know they approached that property owner and the price was not something that was workable, apparently.
So will that property possibly, if CDOT doesn't give access to it off of Wadsworth, will it be orphaned or whatever?
That's a good question.
But it's not on the it's not a topic for here. Never mind. Okay. Okay. Good question.
I don't know what all the zoning is. I'm just concerned if someone could come in and do commercial, which I think would hurt that area. So,
It's residentially zoned, just like your property, and so to do commercial, they would have to go through a zone change as well. Again, staff has concern because it is right at the crest of the hill, and it was going to be tricky with the access.
and then back to the fencing and the easement, would we be notified in writing, or how will we know what is settled if this is all approved and it goes forward?
If that's the case, and it does go forward, they still have another step that they'd have to go through before, they could build on it, and we would flush that out with we would make sure that that was taken care of with you as the adjacent property owners on Yarrow. So.
That's it.
Thank you. Those are great issues. I appreciate you highlighting them. I have, and I apologize, Dome Cipher? 3363 Yarrow Court. You have no questions. Thank you for coming. Ms. Louise Rutherford. Thank you. And both the two citizens are in favor, according to this sheet, by the way. Mr. Frank Stites.
My name is Frank Stites, 3354 Zephyr Court. I own a duplex at 33, 70, and 80 Yarrow. And it backs up, or this property backs up to that. The question is about that easement. Where are you measuring your property line?
Really, we should be addressing the questions to Planning Commission, and then I probably started a bad precedent. Sorry about that.
Well, the question I have is where will their setback come off of those houses? Are they going into that easement, or are they starting at the edge of the easement?
We can take that question and we can ask the staff and we circle back around.
Okay, that's it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's all I have signed up to speak. Does anybody else want to speak that wasn't? Come on up, please. First,
Carol
first,
Greene,
yeah.
Greene, and we're at 3300 and 3310 Yarrow, right on that curve right there. And I only have one request, actually, not a question. We would like, between the two properties, if we could request something like a concrete fence rather than just a wooden fence.
Something more substantial than a
And
wood
how
fence.
high it would be.
Okay. Okay. We can present that to the applicant as part of the
Appreciate it.
part of the design.
Most of us, I think, here on Yarrow Street have wooden fences there. And I'd be more than willing, to tear down our fence and put the concrete fence up there. That would be great. And have
Okay.
more privacy and more silence. Okay?
Okay. Thank you. Is there anybody else that didn't sign up to speak, that wishes to speak? Come on up. Come on. Well, okay. Please come up. Please come up so you're on the record. First name, last name, spell the last name and give an address, please.
My name's Mike Green. I live at Greene, and I live at 3310 Yarrow. I guess the only thing is, the question was brought up about the easement thing, but we've been there hasn't even been a response basically to options that are there. Right? So I guess what I'm concerned about is that I'm in favor of what's going on. I really like what they've done. I'm a little concerned now that we've already shortened up their property lines, because my understanding was there was supposed to be 25 feet between the garage and the property line, and now it's cut to 15. Is that correct? So that's a little bit of a concern. What I don't want to do is be in favor of something, and all of a sudden, every time we get to another step here, we've turned around and we put so much restriction on them that what they proposed to start with and what we've agreed to let them go with has now been wadded up and thrown away, and we get whatever you guys decide is going to be, because, you know what I'm saying? And it makes it very expensive on these people to try and put out a product that somebody's going to want to buy. The last thing I want to see these guys or us put up with is we turn around and we say, okay, develop the property, but you're only going to be able to develop on this instead of this, and now you got to try and sell this for twice of what you started. And then they get into trouble, and then we're all in trouble because the product doesn't get put up and it's not finished. And we're trying to do so many things that are, quite frankly, I don't see a purpose in. So really, I guess my biggest question was trying to get some kind of feedback and answer to what are we going to do about, our property lines on the Yarrow things are set and established. There's a 5-foot easement, I understood, for power, and then there is an existing old wire fence with metal posts on the other side of that 5. Is that is that where everything starts and goes, or are they going to turn around and they want to be right up to the back of our fences? Nobody's even hinted to what that is, and I don't want all of a sudden have my fence shared with somebody else. There should be some kind of, there's an easement because we have overhead power lines down there. So then the only other access is going to be through property, and if there's major repair work, who's going to give it up? The new house owner or the people that have been there for 50 years? So you need to consider that, and when you make this decision. But I'm concerned that you guys keep wanting to reduce these lot sizes and reduce these houses, and I wouldn't spend $350,000 on a small 1,100 square foot house. It's just not going to happen. Maybe it's a sign of the times, but I don't want it to be that way. And I want something that's going to be nice, that we're going to have a nice product, and it's going to put a good foot forward for Wheat Ridge and everybody that's involved. So I guess that's my question. Is there anybody that can have any kind of inclination of what's going on? Because you keep saying it was undedicated, or it was there's no listing for any kind of easement for power or nothing there? I guess I don't understand.
Okay. Again, this came from our city surveyor. We just became aware of it within the last week or so. But we know it's there, and we've been working with our city attorney on how to resolve it. And so I don't have an answer for you, and I apologize. But we will.
You know, it's been presented, and then it was just like there's no response other than, well, we'll take care of it in our next meeting. But
Because we don't want to set either the property owners up or the applicants. And it looks like Mark might have some. Okay, then you need. Go to. Oh,
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. Is there any, come on up, Pat. Please. Reintroduce yourself for the record.
Pat Hott. I do have one more thing, because we had talked about an HOA at our last meeting, and they said, oh, we're not going to do one. And I was concerned because I lived in a small development years ago, and you need some sort of control so that there's not broken down cars or people not parking in the right place, painting ridiculous colors, because again, you're in a more compact area. So I hope that there is an HOA and that there's, it's legally binding and they have a lot of restrictions. Not a lot, but restrictions that keep it nice looking.
So what we heard from staff during the question and answer between staff and the Planning Commission is that because this is a planned residential development, there has to be an HOA in place. And so there was consideration, yes, of having that as part of the. It was at plat time, but yes, there is an HOA must be an HOA in place.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anybody else that wishes to speak? Okay. Then I'm going to close the public. No, I didn't mean that. Take that bang back. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so now we can have the applicant back up to answer some of the questions that were brought up.
Thank you. And again, Mark Thornborough with Martin & Martin.
Can you lift up your mic just a hair?
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. So with respect to the easements on the back of the property, and we heard Pat Hott in the first public meeting, we looked and with respect, I think the drainage easement she was referring to did not show up in the title commitment documents. So within the property boundary that we're planning to rezone and build on, there was no evidence of any easements on record as based on the title research that was done by the title company. We just spoke about that, and we'll ask the title company to revisit that and just confirm that there's nothing on record. But it's possible that the easement that she's referring to is on her property outside the limits of our property. So that's one easement that was discussed before. The other issue that I think Meredith is talking about is what's called in the survey world a gap or a GOR, which has to do with the legal description of the properties. And back in the days when they divided properties up by sections and quarter sections and that sort of thing, which this property originally was divided, sometimes there are small slivers of land that are gaps between adjacent properties that have questionable title or ownership. So it's a small, narrow one that Meredith was talking about that we're going to resolve in the platting process. But it's a narrow, I don't know, it's 6 inches wide, or maybe pardon me? So, but anyway, it's a narrow one. It's not a wide 5-foot easement like was described before.
Okay, any questions with regards to that? No? Okay.
Another issue that was asked was about the fence. So the developer is intending to provide a 6-foot privacy fence through there, and they'll work out the details of the fence materials and composition with the cities with their approval. So we fully intend to put a fence up. And the other question that was brought up was, where's the setback for the rear of the homes being measured from? It's from the property line that's defined in our legal description. So again, referring back to, there may be a gap in there, but if you look at the boundary lines, the lines that are shown in the development plans, with respect to where tree lines or fence lines are, that's where the setbacks are being measured from. So what you see in the plans are exactly what we're going to do in terms of measuring the setbacks. So if our property line is 6 inches from where the existing fence is, then you would have 15 feet 6 inches from your fence line today if you're trying to get a measurement. So I think that's the end of the questions that were asked.
Did anybody have any follow-up questions, Emery? Nope, I think we're good. Are there any follow-up questions of staff? Scott? Please.
I have a couple questions. One is, there's no landscape buffer required on that southern eastern part for the emergency access road? Off of Wadsworth, the road that comes off of Wadsworth on the southern portion, there's no landscape required buffers? Okay. And then my other two questions are basically, would we need to make a condition for that crosswalk connection or not? Yes? Just that staff work, that the developer work with staff?
That would be appropriate,
Okay.
yes, thank you.
And then would we need to do a condition for the developer to work with staff for an emergency gate access on that?
No, I think that's more of an administrative
Okay.
function. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Steve? Did you have anything? Emery? No, I'm fine. Amanda? Fallon?
Yeah, quick question. So it's my understanding, well, I don't know, Meredith, help me remember the regulations in the code correctly. In a PRD, is there a requirement for on-street parking, or just parking provided, for like so many spaces per unit, whether that's in a garage or
Right,
driveway?
typically we defer back to the Chapter 26, Section 501, which is the off-street parking, and in those regulations, for a single or two-family, there is a requirement for 4 off-street parking spaces if there's no on-street parking, or 2 if there is on-street parking.
But it doesn't specify how many on-street parking spaces you need?
No.
So as long as there is some on-street parking provided? Directly in front of the residence in question, the property in question, or just somewhere on the street?
It does not specify. It's a public street, so theoretically people could park anywhere.
No, but it's not a public street. It's a private street. It's public. This is okay. Sorry, my mistake. All right. I'm just all right. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions of staff? Okay, now I'm going to close the public hearing. So, now is the time for a motion, and then discussion on the motion. You gonna do it?
I'll do it, okay.
Okay.
All right. I move to recommend approval of case number WZ-14-06, a request for approval of zone change from residential 2, R2, to planned residential commercial development, PRD, zoning, and an outline development plan, an ODP, on property located at 7671 West 32nd Avenue and 3299 Wadsworth Boulevard for the following reasons. Number one, the proposal is consistent with the city's guiding documents, including the Wadsworth Sub-Area Plan, the Neighborhood Revitalization Plan, and Envision Wheat Ridge. The proposed zoning and density provide a logical land use transition between Wadsworth, the surrounding higher density developments, and the low density neighborhood to the west. The proposal meets all, number three, the proposal meets all of the zone change criteria. And number four, all requirements for the outline development plan have been met with the following conditions. Number one being that additional architectural designs be required and reviewed at the time of the SDP. And number two, the schematic detail for lots 7 through 20 must be revised to more accurately represent the larger narrow lots. And number three, that the developer is encouraged to work with the city forester to create a tree-friendly plan with consideration of old and new plantings.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Scott?
I would like to make a motion to add an additional condition. The developer work with staff to find a safer crosswalk connection from the east sidewalk to the west sidewalk.
Do you
Accept it, yeah.
Emery, do you accept that too? Are there any other friendly amendments?
I have a friendly amendment discussion.
Is it tree friendly? No.
I think 50% masonry is too high for this particular development. However, I want to be sensitive to the realities of the market and of staff. While I hope that the developer is successful and gets through and sells all 20 lots within a year, the reality is it could take time. The market could dive again. I'm a little bit worried that this developer could be great, but what if another one comes in and perhaps doesn't have as high quality product? I wouldn't mind maybe at least 25%, and I think maybe 25% could work within the elevate. I'm not an architect, but still establish some of the goals of city staff and not compromise some of the architecture intent of the developer. That's just a suggestion, so I'm open to discussion on that.
I have concerns just about any set percentage requirement on the masonry, just because it can be very appropriate for some architectural styles and completely sort of a foreign addition to others. I don't know. With the cottage style architecture that they're proposing in that, just on that one, elevation we saw, which granted was very conceptual and not very detailed, I have some reservations about a set requirement of a set percentage, but, that's just me. What do you guys think?
I would tend to bring it down farther than 25, because I completely agree with you. But I do think that there are architectural plans that wouldn't need masonry that would be very, thoughts from others?
Well, they're not going to be very wide, so we're not talking a lot of, it's not a full brick house. I mean, they're going to be narrow frontages. And if they can develop that into the porch scheme, because they're all going to have porches, I don't know. 50% is a high number, but it's not a real high number if you've got a two-story house, because you only got 50% of the frontal of the house going to be brick. I don't know, on a ranch, it's not raised, then the 15% would probably be enough. I don't know. I mean that's a problem.
Commissioner Weaver, how do you feel about 15% as a minimum? I'm afraid
Yeah.
we could
No,
suggest, condition like, well, it's an appropriate amount. The problem is that gets really subjective and that kind of dilutes it. I'd rather not have that condition at all.
Can I ask staff, I mean, does this fit in with sort of the intent of, or are we
Well,
just mincing words at this point? It fits-
well, sort of both. If you are really worried about the design and how it be incorporated, because we don't want it to look, like I say, inappropriate. It's like, oh, we had to incorporate brick, it doesn't fit within what makes sense or is historic, but we're going to do it anyway because staff said we have to. Maybe you go but just back to mandatory brick accents. And that's subjective, yes.
What, may I add?
I think it's important to keep in mind that this will be in front of the Planning Commission again as a specific development plan.
Say it again.
This item will be in front of the Planning Commission again as a specific development plan. So I at least think we've heard your input in terms of 50% isn't the number, but we're concerned about architectural quality. And I think in working on the specific development plan, one of the things that will be addressed that isn't sufficiently addressed now is architectural criteria for every aspect of the home. So I think that should be able to cover it, and I think we've gotten pretty good direction from you this evening as to where we should go with that.
Okay. Commissioner Timms, so does the first, which is the second, the additional architectural designs will be required and reviewed at the time of SDP?
That would be sufficient.
Is
then
that
for me.
sufficient? Okay.
Based on that input. Thank you.
So do we need to go back and repeat where we are? No? Okay.
Not that I followed. I have one comment with regards to, sorry about this, Alan, a sidewalk to the east on the southern facing. So this property has more sidewalk than some areas in Wheat Ridge that are supposedly semi-rural. Most parents, if they have kids, they want them on the sidewalk closest to the driveways next to the house and not blocked by cars where balls can shoot out and then they go into the street. So if I had to put a sidewalk, I'd prefer to put it next to the house versus on the other side. That's my personal opinion.
My concern is that, say you're living in a house on lots, say 15 through 20 there on that east side, and your kid wants to go to, walk up to the Crown Hill Open Space Park or,
Yep.
someplace like that. As a parent, I know I can tell my children, all right, make sure you go around the cul-de-sac to the west side and stay on the sidewalk, blah, blah, blah. And, blah, blah, blah is basically all they're going to hear. They're going to, I would like to think my child would follow what I say, but I know better sometimes. I just have some concerns about, just from a public safety standpoint about that.
Yeah.
And I don't get me wrong, I live over here in District 1. Probably 30% of the streets in my neighborhood don't have sidewalks, and I think they're reasonably safe. They're also a lot wider than 32 feet.
Yeah.
So and they're not parked on a lot either. So that's my hesitation with that.
Understood.
And I understand the developers need to make money. That's one of the reasons why they're a developer, and I totally get that. I get the reason for a set number of lots. I understand that's what makes it profitable. So yeah, from my standpoint, I don't know where I'm at on that, but I take your point.
Okay.
I just want
Amanda.
to ask a question. So we are now, maybe I'm confused on where we are as far as the sidewalk issue. So is the crosswalk you're proposing at near 20, crossing over to 7, or is it?
We didn't state where it was going to be, that the applicant worked with the staff to put in a
Thank you.
crosswalk. Okay, any more discussion? Okay, let's vote.
I'm sorry, just for a procedural, do we need to vote on the amendment before? I'll second.
They accepted a friendly amendment. It was just a friendly amendment. It wasn't voted on, so it doesn't have to be voted on.
Simply voted on?
Right. Okay, are we ready?
I think so. Should
Okay.
we repeat it? No.
No.
Okay.
I think do you need to repeat it? I don't want
I
to.
just wanted to clarify, so we went to having the additional architectural designs, the schematic detail.
Yes.
We talked about number 3 being the friendly plan for trees, and number 4 being
Crosswalk.
a crosswalk. Correct?
Work with
Developer
staff.
will work with staff for a
Right.
crosswalk, at not a specific place. Okay. All right, thanks.
Are we good? Please vote.
And the motion carries 5-1 with Commissioner Buckman voting no.
So before you leave, let me explain what's going to happen now. This, Meredith, do you want to explain to the?
Okay, well, this case will go on to city council. There will be another sign put on the property, and within 300 feet, you'll get a notice, a letter notice. I don't remember the date. I want to say August 8th, but I don't have a calendar in front of me. Okay, is that what the noticing letter said? Then that's correct. So it will go on to city council, and so all the testimony that was made tonight will go into the record, and you're certainly welcome to come to city council to speak as well.
Thank you. And now we're going to take a break for 8 minutes. We'll be back promptly at 9 o'clock. Thank you. to. Welcome back to Planning Commission for June 19th, 2014. We just finished one case. We are going to start case number Z0814-03, an ordinance amending the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning the keeping of dwarf goats. For the city.
Yes, so we move on to a slightly different portion of the agenda. 3 ordinances, 2 on marijuana and 1 on goats. So here we go. So the issue of raising dwarf goats on residential properties in Wheat Ridge has recently, earlier this year, it's been several months, but the permissibility of doing that and the rules around that have come up as a topic of conversation, in large part because of a property owner in the city who's in the audience today and perhaps will speak, but who was interested in doing that on a relatively smaller lot on the east side of Wheat Ridge. Dwarf goats, if you aren't familiar with them, have become increasingly popular as both pets and sources of dairy products, whether it be pure milk or other products that can be made from that product. So they've been increasingly common to have on residential properties. And dwarf goats, unlike regular goats, are substantially smaller. So a dwarf goat is typically between, kind of 40 and maybe up to 70, 75 pounds, as I understand it. And regular goats are typically more around the 150-pound size. So significantly smaller in terms of their potential impact in terms of waste and the amount of land that they need to kind of roam and graze and such. 2 species that are fairly common are the African pygmy and the Nigerian dwarf goats. I'm not sure if there are other breeds, but those are the 2 that we've helped to define what a dwarf goat is, not in a limiting way, but by way of example in the proposed ordinance. So again, dwarf goats are not explicitly addressed in our existing codes pertaining to domestic animals, whether it be pets such as dogs and cats or other small animals that we address specifically in the code. And because of that silence in the code, we had occasion to have to make a determination on the applicability of various code sections to this particular species of animals. And because we thought it was really the only door that was open to us, given the fact that we do address large goats in our large animal section of the code, we felt it was the only door that we really had open to us under the existing code was to classify them as a large animal, most similar to a goat. And generally, those are large animals are only allowed on what I'll just classify as fairly large residential lots. There's a minimum open lot area that's required to have any large animals, whether it be 1 or more than 1, and that's 9,000 square feet, and that would be open lot area, so exclusive of structures. So, you'd basically be looking at a little, probably at least a 12,000 square foot lot, if not larger. And not that those are uncommon in Wheat Ridge, but they're really not common they're a minority of our residential properties in the city. So the policy question as to whether we should be more permissive on smaller lots was brought up. That issue was actually taken to the Animal Welfare and Control Commission, and they looked favorably upon creating some new regulatory environment that would be more permissive. Those recommendations and ideas from that commission were forwarded to City Council at a study session, and they too were generally supportive of considering modifications to the zoning code to be more permissive of these types of animals. So staff then took that direction and drafted a proposed approach that would actually amend both our large animal and our small animal sections of the code, as well as a few other minor amendments such as definitions and the use chart to allow more opportunities for homeowners to keep a limited number of dwarf goats. So some of the specific provisions that we're proposing is that you'd be allowed up to 3 dwarf goats on smaller residential lots. Important to note that they are fairly social animals, so as I understand it, you'd never have 1. I think the minimum that you'd have would be 2, just in terms of their happiness as an animal or as a pet. We would just kind of use the existing small animal regulations in the proposed ordinance in terms of what would be required in terms of setbacks for structures that would be required to provide, most importantly, shelter for the goats. Also, as I understand it, I don't profess to be an expert, but they don't particularly like getting rained on. So some sort of a shelter, as I understand it, is fairly important. So the setback requirements are already in place for small animals, which is 15 feet from the property line for those structures and 30 feet from the principal structure on an adjacent lot. So providing some good separation in terms of being sensitive to the impacts that these animals might have on a neighbor who, you know, maybe isn't as fond as the goats. We're proposing not to allow unneutered male goats, based, I think, in large part on concerns with odor and also potentially size. And then under our large animal regulations, as is discussed in the report, you know, we have a fairly unique thing in Wheat Ridge, which is that all large animals are measured in horse equivalent units, which I don't mean to sound like I'm mocking that. I think it's actually a really good regulation and has worked well for us. But so for the one horse equivalent unit is what triggers that 9,000 square foot minimum amount of open lot area. And then for smaller species of animals, livestock, such as llamas or alpacas, we make a horse equivalent. So don't quote me on this, but I think you know, regular goats are 3 goats equals 1 horse equivalent. I think it's 4 alpacas, or maybe it's 4 llamas, and so it's anyways, and so on and so on. So it's basically trying to say, you know, what's the impact in terms of amount of grazable land and that sort of thing from these smaller large animals. And so we've proposed that for dwarf goats, which is a relatively smaller species, that we would define that as 6 would be the horse equivalent unit in dwarf goats, so that if you had a property that could accommodate 1 horse equivalent unit, which again is 9,000 square feet of minimum open lot area is the big requirement. If you had that size of a lot, you could have, you know, 6 dwarf goats in lieu of having a horse, if that was your choice. So that's my summary. Obviously, as a proposed amendment to the zoning code, chapter 26, please see Planning Commission is required to hold a public hearing, make a recommendation to City Council, and that's. I'm glad to answer questions.
Scott, did you have any questions?
I think the only question I have is kind of more of the what if for any noise. I think I'd like to think of it as more of a kind of just a good neighbor. How, you know, there might be some people that would be totally fine with having, you know, 3 to 6 goats next to you. There might be some people that 1 goat is too much.
Right.
And if the city allows you to have goats, but then the neighbor's like, this isn't working for me. You know, I moved here, it was quiet, and now I got goats making noise. How do we, as a city, enforce that?
Yeah. Well, a couple things. I think, you know, I think if we go in this direction, you know, it's a very conscious decision to say, as a community, we generally think they're a good addition to our community. Now, on an individual property basis, obviously that's going to vary a lot, just like some people don't like dogs or some people don't like cats, or, you know, you name the species that might be allowed. You know, we allow chickens, various other ducks, geese, so we're fairly permissive in terms of urban agriculture and have been historically. So that's kind of our policy side of things. The reason we pick 3 is because that's what we allow in terms of dogs as well. So to the extent that there are impacts, and noise could be one of them, we're trying to do a parallel, just given kind of the similarity in size and maybe the potential to make noise. And I think that varies a lot amongst goats, just like it does most animal species. You know, ultimately it becomes a nuisance issue, which I think is really the answer to your question, is if, just like you have a barking dog that is becoming a nuisance, that there could be a threshold. We haven't attempted to define that, where a goat would become, you know, so loud and talkative at all hours of day, or I can't speak to exactly the circumstances because we haven't defined it, but that would be a nuisance call that our code enforcement officers would enforce.
Thank you. And I actually just went to a farm on Saturday or Sunday, and they had goats, dwarf goats. They were very friendly. They actually really didn't make much noise at all.
Right.
But,
No, that's been my limited experience as well.
yes, thank you.
Thank you for that update. My first question is, or I just need clarification, can you explain for us what the city's Animal Welfare and Control Commission is? Like, what's their kind of purpose, and are they?
It's in part just an advisory board. They do have a limited kind of regulatory role in making recommendations on the harboring of wild animals. So they can actually issue exotic animal licenses for certain periods of time. They have a certain role in reviewing kennel licenses as well, though that role has been diminished and based on some changes to the code in the last several years. So we don't directly staff them. So
they're appointed by council?
They are.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is a rhetorical question, maybe. I was surprised to see in the staff report that we regulate the number of cats and dogs in the city. But I'm more surprised to see this in the zoning code versus, I guess, another chapter of the municipal code. Was there talk among any of this that the zoning code is the best place for animal regulations versus other chapters? Was that ever discussed among any levels of staff or anything?
It wasn't.
Okay.
I mean, maybe in large part because we kind of had that as our starting point.
I see.
So we didn't really, and I'm not saying we couldn't have, we certainly could have, but we didn't look into that in terms of whether there's a different section of the code that would also make sense.
So the staff proposal is to have 3 per residential lot, right? What if someone wanted to do 4?
Then they would
go to the Board of Adjustment for a variance?
No,
or is there?
That'd be considered a use variance. So it just
Okay.
it's a question you couldn't ask.
So you just couldn't have, unless you had a specific zoning that allowed for.
You'd get kicked into the large animal regulations. So you'd have to have one of those larger properties. So
Okay.
If you had a property that again is probably in that 12,000 square foot,
Okay.
which is what we require in R1 zoning. So a significant portion of the kind of the west side of town, if you will, has that size of lot. So
Right.
they're not uncommon, but I'd say it's a less than half of our lots are certainly that size, but that's the type of property that you need to look for.
So variance not an option. That's
right.
Okay. And then, especially on the west side of town, certain HOAs are in place. If the HOAs prohibit this, the city could still allow it, but the HOA could still supersede with a prohibition. Is that your understanding? I know the city doesn't get involved in private agreements like that, but is that your understanding?
Yes.
Okay. And then this, you gave us in our packets, dwarf dairy goats in Wheat Ridge. Nice packet. Nice information. However, I would be remiss to say this certainly is biased, I guess. My question is it's definitely pro dairy goats. What cons, I guess, in your research have you found associated with dwarf dairy goats?
You know, we really haven't found any with they're relatively, their waste does not seem to be particularly impactful. It's fairly compact, if you will, and the type of diet that they eat is very healthy. So, I mean, I think that those two factors are probably related. Again, there's a little bit of a noise impact, and obviously you need some open lot area, which we're proposing to require, so that they have some space to utilize and to graze potentially, and to not completely destroy the property. But we think they're not dissimilar to someone having a dog of a similar size that has those same kinds of issues with the potential for waste, the potential for noise if not properly managed.
The only thing I did look online for what that's worth, and by far the majority of comments are very pro across the country, as I found. If there were any cons, they tend to eat a lot, but they can tend to eat sometimes what they things that they find, whether that be or in the yards, right? They maybe marijuana. I don't know. They jump. They can jump high. That's not really bad. There was, and I don't know. Maybe these nice ladies will come and speak to us. There was something mentioned about, not in this, but about Nubian goats, or perhaps they make a lot of noise, and I have no idea what the difference is between a Nigerian dwarf and an African pygmy and a Nubian. So maybe we can get some clarification on that. That was something that they said that those made a lot of noise, and have you heard that as well? So, you can help us on that. Okay, good. All right. Well, I just like, for the sake of the public hearing, to have potentially all pros and all cons listed. So, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Emery.
Are they going to be needed to, will they have to be licensed like the city of Denver? One-time license fee?
We've not proposed a
We're
license.
not going, so we're not going to know how many goats are in the city.
No.
So if I wanted, if my whole block wanted goats, everybody could have goats. I mean, you could have 50 goats in my block with no license fee. How about immunizations and such? I mean, without a license fee, do the goats need to be immunized against anything? I mean, is this something that needs to be thought of, or?
Yeah, I don't know, but I would say just by way of precedent, which is kind of what it is, but you know, we don't, with the exception of dogs and requiring licenses for them, you know, we don't get into that kind of those health aspects or immunizations for other types of livestock or poultry. I mean, it's just one of those things that, you know, I'm not even sure at a state level if there's any regulation there, but it's not something that we've delved into in terms of having those requirements.
Well, why do we have to license dogs then?
Well, I don't want this.
I mean, I
It's
just.
Jefferson County, actually.
Jefferson
Yeah,
County.
exactly, and
Right.
the licensure also assists in generating revenue to pay for the Foothills Animal Shelter, which all the communities have to jointly participate in funding, and that's a facility that we're required to have as a county.
Okay. The other question, they need shelter, is that we can't enforce it without a license. I mean, if we don't know, if I don't know my neighbor's going to have goats, and just on a humane thought, if the people don't care, the goat's not going to have shelter and going to freeze to death, you know, in the wintertime or whatever. I'm just talking out loud. I mean, without any rules here, with reference to sheltering and all, we do have rules on the poultry, don't we? As far as needing to have sheltering?
No, it's more just if you have, these are the rules around where you can locate it on your property. So in the rear yard,
Right,
with certain
okay.
setbacks.
Okay. That's all I have then.
Thank you.
Am I allowed to speak to any of this yet?
Yes, it's your turn now, but you have to, are you,
Question, or can I answer some of the questions?
are you, I think this is kind of open, but you have to talk in your mic.
First of all, I wanted to go back to what Commissioner Tim was talking about as far as the Animal Commission. Just to clarify some things, I've actually had some contact with Ms. Kraft around all of these issues and the process of which this all came about. At some point, there was comment made that Animal Commission meetings were closed. And I just wanted to clarify that it was my understanding that all public meetings were public in the city of Wheat Ridge. Would there be any reason that an Animal Commission would be closed?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, because there are some really interesting, because it's sitting in the planning code and because we're trying to be more friendly to urban agriculture, there's some pathways maybe that need to be clarified at some point as more people are interested in these things, because I think all the things that Commissioner Timms brought up are really, really important as far as, hey, this sits in the planning code and isn't that interesting? And there's some other issues related around this. I wanted to address some of the things. We don't have any regulation as far as how animals are sheltered, so that's up to the personal owner, and the only reason that dogs are licensed, one of the big ones is rabies, because that's the thing that's tracked. Other than that, goats do not, they can carry some big diseases, but they are among goats. One of them is caprine arthritis. That's considered the big one. But typically, as I am a goat owner, and I'm a large goat owner, so I don't know if that answers your question about regulation of immunization. But we don't regulate any animals. That's the choice of the owner thus far, other than the regulated rabies for dogs. And I don't think cats. I don't have a cat, so. Nubians are very loud, and they're typically bigger goats. I have seen dwarf Nubians, but they're I've only dealt with large Nubians, and every goat can have a larger voice or a smaller voice, and my experience has been same as yours, that dwarf goats tend to be a lot quieter generally, and at least in the goat community, we think of dwarf goats way more in the small animal category, much more like a dog, and I'm sure we'll hear from Ms. Kraft in a bit, but my experience is that they're actually a lot quieter than dogs generally, but that's my experience. They are ruminants, so they're not going to be anything like a pig or anything like that that's going to be eating creation. There's not going to be an issue of E. coli or any sort of, it's going to be poop that's going to be good for yards, essentially. And I think, I don't know, I tried to address all those questions. So, and I guess we'll come back in discussion.
Ellen?
Nothing from me.
Nothing.
I'm enjoying the conversation. It's very educational as a non-goat owner.
So I have a couple, did you have questions? So I have a couple questions. Back to Steve's idea of cracking open the code and doing some cleanup while we're in here. So the next time we have another type of animal that becomes an interesting animal to have, we're just going to have to do this over again, whether it be chinchillas or, I don't know.
Chinchillas are actually
I know, but weasels, ferrets, whatever else, we're going to have to crack open this code again, right? Is that the intent?
I suppose so. I mean,
Okay.
we didn't try and do some sort of exhaustive research, but we just
No,
didn't.
I'm just trying to get a lay of the land. Okay, and then if this passes, then I'm assuming somebody's going to tell code enforcement that.
Yes, we've been working actively with code enforcement on this
So they'll
code
be
amendment.
set up in their trucks to be able to handle goats like they would be able to handle a. They are.
They already are, because we have a lot of goats in Wheat Ridge, actually.
I know, but for code enforcement,
I deal
they
with
get
code
away?
enforcement
Oh,
all
okay,
the time.
okay. Okay,
You're saying if you had a goat that got loose,
Yeah.
having to handle it?
Yep.
Yeah.
yeah, okay. I don't have any other questions. I was just thinking it was a great opportunity to do some code cleanup while we were in here talking goats, and we can do that. It's an interesting concept of why it's in the code.
And I think it's a great question, and I think it's always a good idea to ask those questions when you're amending the code. My initial reaction is I think it works okay in the zoning code. I mean, it's a land use, it's an accessory use to a residential occupancy of a property. It involves structures which are regulated by setbacks. So I'm not sure it doesn't work there. I mean, I'm glad to have that conversation further, but we don't end up being the field code enforcement officers because those are housed out of the police department, but we work super close with them, right? I mean, we have a meeting with them every other week, and the office a few 50 feet from us, and we work pretty closely on things like this.
And then, not related to goats, but since we're in the code, has that commission heard concerns from neighbors about horse properties, that while we're in this code again, that things need to be tweaked with regards to
We talked about
horse
that,
equivalent
and
units?
I'm sure yes, I'm sure they feel complaints about horse properties or any kind of properties where you have livestock or anything that's and dogs, right? I'm not familiar with specific instances, so I think there wasn't any kind of volume, right? There wasn't any kind of volume of concern that caused us to say, well, because we asked the question, while we're at it, should we be fine tuning our large animal regulations or our small animal regulations? And I think the general answer was they seem to be working pretty well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Steve.
I just have two follow-up questions. First is, in terms of people inquiring, we have the property owner at 3495 Ames, right, that you referenced, and then in the attachments that you gave us tonight, we have resident 4125 Quay Street expressing support. Have you received other inquiries as this process has gone forward from Wheat Ridge residents about this in a positive light?
A couple, yeah.
Okay.
In terms of people encouraging us to move forward.
In addition to these?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the second one, just for clarification, dwarf goats shall be limited to a maximum of 3 per residential dwelling unit. No matter the zoning, so single family detached, single family attached, multifamily potentially, if it meets these other criteria. Is that correct?
It is.
Obviously, multifamily probably won't meet this, although I guess theoretically you may have condos or townhomes maybe that have big private areas, but I just want to clarify, it's potentially for all residential types.
That's correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Amanda?
You go ahead.
I've actually spent a lot of time in this code in the last month, and so I just wanted to share some. I actually think the code, with the inclusion of what we're talking about tonight, does a really good job of touching almost all kinds of animals, and because we've had this small animal category, we had this big animal category, but it's just an animal that's typically put in a big animal category that fits in a small animal category. So I think the question is, are there other large animal herding breeds that would fit in the small animal, right, dwarf ponies? But I think the code actually deals with dwarf ponies.
Pigs.
We are not allowed to have pigs in Wheat Ridge.
Well, look at you.
Oh, I spent a lot of time digging through this. So I just wanted to say that I actually think that the addition of this, I'm sure there will be something else that somebody will find, but I think this really makes it a lot more inclusive, that we're both dealing with it in the large animal piece and in the small animal piece. And I can't think of any other large animal that they're currently dwarfing. But I just wanted to say that I think it's done a pretty good job of dealing with all animals. And since I have a lot of different kinds of animals, I get the opportunity to deal with code enforcement a lot regarding all of these regulations, and so they're very well aware of they're waiting for guidance on this stuff. So.
Emery?
Well, I'm still trying to figure out then on the multifamily units, let us say a triplex or whatever, is there going to be enough yard space to put goats in one of those?
That's kind of what we thought was the limiting factor and why we didn't make a distinguishment of some larger multifamily property with a property owner that's so inclined to make available some sort of a goat area on the property for use of their tenants. I mean, the chances of it seem slim, but if that happened, would we be okay with that, provided they were meeting all these other requirements? And I think what we're suggesting is yes. Now, the other kind of class of multifamily property would be, or classes, I'll say, would be townhomes or I guess duplexes or triplexes to some extent. And again, thinking that we know we have setback requirements, we know we have minimum open lot area requirements. So, you know, if someone just had a kind of a typical townhome on a typical townhome lot, which is, you know, exterior wall to exterior wall and has a, you know, 20 by 10 patio, you know, which often is going to have a deck or, you know, some sort of a patio, they're probably just not going to be able to meet the requirements. You know, to meet a 15-foot setback requirement on a lot that's 30 feet wide is, or if that, right? I mean, a lot of townhome lots are only going to be 20 feet wide. So we didn't, you know, we try and not come up with more rules than we have to, so we didn't feel like we needed to make a distinguishment between single family and multifamily. And if there's some, you know, really big townhome lots for some reason that could have a goat, they could potentially have a goat or two or three.
But then that's going to end up on enforcement's side. I mean, if say I'm in a townhome situation and my neighbor decides to do a goat or two goats or whatever, and there isn't that much green space, but just enough, or, I mean, how are we going to enforce this? I mean, am I going to have to call animal enforcement and say, well, my neighbor's got two goats and he shouldn't have goats? I mean, it's going to be...
Yeah, yes. I mean, our code enforcement, like most organizations or most municipalities, is, you know, pretty much entirely complaint-based. So if you as a neighbor to someone with goats had concerns with whether they were in compliance with the rules, whether it be sufficient open lot area or, you know, meeting the setback requirements for something, you would call code enforcement and they would respond accordingly. And if there were violations, those would be addressed through the administrative citation and hearing process.
One more thing, then Denver, they're collecting a $25 license fee for goats. So they must be keeping track of how many goats are in the city and county of Denver. Which I think is something that we need to consider on this kind of an animal, because we're talking about small property, not large property. I mean, it's we got two different things here. I mean, you need to license a dog, basically for rabies and whatever, distemper, and it's a small animal. I mean, we're not classifying it as a large animal, which is a horse of a different color. Single resident or multiple residents in a unit can have a dog if it's an indoor dog, a small dog. I mean, there's no rule against that. I mean, if I live in an apartment, I can have a dog. I mean, and it's a small animal, so I'm trying to figure out why we need to class why we're not charging a license fee for goats, and, you know, it just, I mean, I'm sort of a miss on it.
And I mean, I appreciate the comment. I think, you know, we haven't made the policy decision to license any small or large animals in the city. So the only species of animals that requires licensure, as has been discussed, is dogs. And that's in part based on a revenue need to support the facilities that they require in terms of the Foothills Animal Shelter facility and our contribution to that. And as Ms. Weaver noted, the concern with the potential spread of disease to other animals or humans because of the rabies issue. So, lacking direction to more globally license small and large animals at a local level, we didn't think there was a reason to, from a policy perspective, to single out dwarf goats as something that would require licensure.
Okay. What does Denver do with their $25 fee other than put it in the bank?
I don't know. If it's
do they keep track of the goats? I mean, do they have a goat registry?
I don't know.
I mean, I think we need to have a goat registry. Personally, I mean, I have trouble with neighbors with dogs, barking dogs, and you call enforcement, and you go through 3-4 months of hassle with it, to finally enforcement says, well, you gotta get this dog shut up or we're gonna do something with it, I mean, it isn't just the first complaint. I mean, complaints, in a neighborhood, we're going to be introducing goats that are noisy or boisterous. We have dogs that are a problem, I know in my neighborhood, and I've called enforcement on dogs a half a block away or a block and a half away that and walked over to these people's house, and enforcement finally comes, the cops come, and half of the neighborhood is there also because it's disturbing everybody. And I'm just, and here that dog is licensed, and
Well, I think it's up to the commission ultimately to decide whether you as a group think licensure is necessary. And if you want to make that recommendation to city council, you certainly are free to do that.
Because the licensing has nothing to do with code enforcement.
No.
They're completely separate ideas.
But you might have a little more teeth in it, because if you had people that got a goat or 2 goats and didn't get a license, and they're noisy, now you've got something here that they're against the law.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and again, I just say again, we have a lot of breeds of small and large animals that can have impacts, whether it be odor or noise or you name it, and we don't choose to license any of them. So,
like roosters,
roosters, chickens. Oh, that's true. We're not right. So I.
We are not allowed to have roosters.
Tell my neighbor up the street. Okay, so if Mr. Dorsey would want to add that as a condition?
You as a body are making a recommendation to city council, so whatever you choose to add as conditions is certainly your prerogative.
Okay. Scott?
I have one question. So as I'm looking here in the section 26-605, large animals, it references fencing standards. But I don't, is it my understanding that there's nothing with the goats that, as I'm looking through the verbiage, I don't see anything that talks about fencing standards?
In 605 or 606?
Well, I know definitely not in 606, but I know there's the 605. Does it automatically fall into that? That it would comply with fencing standards?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But under the other one, the 606, would it have to? Is there fencing standards for that?
Only to the extent that they comply with just our general fencing standards in terms of height and construction.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are we ready to hear from the public? Yes? Okay.
We're going to come back to discussion about
Yes,
okay.
yes. So I have 2 people on the list. Apologize if I misspell your last name. And then if the other person wishes to speak afterwards. So Melissa Say-Neuarth. Sorry, it's late. Do me a favor. Say your name, first and last name, spell your last name, and give an address, please. Thank you.
My name is Melissa Sanorath, Saynourath.
Thank you.
I'm at 4085 Depew Street. And I've lived in Wheat Ridge with my family. We raise dwarf goats and have done so for about the last 3 years. Our young neighbors come to pet them, and daily dog walking neighbors call out to the goats as they pass, hoping for a glimpse of them. They're a big hit in the neighborhood. When unknowing passing neighbors spot them for the first time, they frequently stop and ask questions and tell us how wonderful it is that we have food-producing animals in our yard. They share their surprise about how they had no idea that we even had them and are amazed at how quiet and inconspicuous they are, unlike the loud barking dogs, as you mentioned, in the neighborhood. We've heard numerous stories from our elderly neighbors about Wheat Ridge's rich history in the farm and agriculture, and how wonderful it is to see a taste of that in returning to our homestead and our residential area. We've proudly owned our Wheat Ridge house for about 13 years. When we were researching the Wheat Ridge rules prior to getting our goats, it was very confusing. We read about the 9,000 square feet of open space and horse equivalents, but nothing that specifically addressed dwarf goats. We finally called animal control and the sheriff's department for clarification. They basically said that the rules are old and have never been updated because there was never a need. So now I feel that there is a need. Urban homesteading is becoming increasingly popular, and more and more families in Wheat Ridge are raising goats or want goats. And I personally know multiple families that are interested in adding goats and are in the research process right now. I'm informing you of my homestead because I want to show that dwarf goats can easily and happily be kept in a small urban homestead in a residential area. It is our hope that Wheat Ridge continues to be a leader in the urban agriculture and sustainability with proper guidelines in place, but we're also asking that unnecessary rules and restrictions not be added to the ordinance, keeping consistent with the Wheat Ridge culture and heritage that we've liked about the city. Basically, my hope is to add dwarf goats to the ordinance so that dwarf goats are not confused with full-size goats, and to proceed with the same Wheat Ridge spirit of being lenient and simple in the approach. The current small animal and poultry ordinance is well done. It's vague, but it acknowledges that they are allowed in the backyard setup following some simple rules. And I think ideally, dwarf goats could simply mimic that current small animal and poultry ordinance that's currently in place. Some examples of rules and regulations that I feel would be unnecessary include, doesn't all of them, but restricting dwarf goats from roaming freely within a fenced yard or housing in a specific area or yard. Our neighbors love the fact that they can walk up to our fence and reach over and pet them or feed them. And also adding yard size restrictions on dwarf goats, because dwarf goats are the same size, if not smaller, than most dogs in my neighborhood, and many times quieter, and their waste is less offensive. So basically, if you have a yard, I think, and can humanely shelter and contain a goat, I feel that you should be able to have a dwarf goat. Square feet per horse equivalent does not really apply to dwarf goats due to their small stature and their mild mannerisms. So thank you for your consideration and time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does anybody have any questions? Thank you for coming in, and thanks for waiting through the last case. Appreciate it. Next name is Sundari Kraft. And because you can lift the mic, please.
Good evening. Thank you, members of the commission. My name is Sundari Elizabeth Kraft. That's K-R-A-F-T. I live at 3495 Ames Street on the east part of Wheat Ridge. I would like to first draw your attention. I can see that you've all looked at your packets, but to the letters of support for the dwarf goat ordinance, one from Denver City Councilwoman Susan Shepard, one from Rachel Hulteen of Live Well Wheat Ridge, and another from Ashley Bassett of Live Local Harvest. My family recently moved to Wheat Ridge from Denver, where we kept dwarf goats in our backyard. Our lot in Denver was 6,400 square feet, which is considered a double lot in Denver. In 2011, Denver passed a food-producing animals ordinance, which included dwarf goats. There are a few common-sense guidelines put in place as part of the ordinance, but the city took great care to be sure that the ordinance was usable for its citizens. For example, the ordinance in Denver required 130 square feet of permeable space per goat, and it requires that any shelter be 15 feet from a neighbor's dwelling. There is no setback requirement in the Denver ordinance. The ordinance requires fencing adequate to contain the animals, but the goats are permitted to wander right up to the fence line. And before I go any further, I want to say I'm not saying that Wheat Ridge should be just like Denver. Since moving to Wheat Ridge, my family has consistently experienced a culture of hospitality and a pride of place that feels special to us. I've been told over and over again about Wheat Ridge's agricultural heritage and its commitment to supporting urban agriculture and self-sustainability. As someone who worked in sustainable food policy outside of Wheat Ridge, I can attest to the fact that Wheat Ridge has a reputation of being a regional leader in sustainability issues, particularly as they relate to food. I believe that Wheat Ridge has adopted wonderful urban agriculture laws, and the small animal rules are generally very good. The only thing that is currently lacking is the inclusion of dwarf goats within the category of small animals permitted in backyards. Dwarf goats are an established urban homesteading animal, like Amanda referred to, allowed in cities like Seattle, Portland, and Chicago. I feel that the draft ordinance prepared by city staff would support the keeping of these animals in Wheat Ridge in a way that works within our neighborhoods without imposing unnecessary restrictions. Wheat Ridge currently allows the keeping of up to 3 dogs, each of which could be quite large, in backyards. Dwarf goats max out at 75 pounds and are typically 50 to 60 pounds. And the restriction on intact males protects neighbors against that horrible, horrible, awful goaty smell. And the shelter setbacks match the current rules for other small animals. And I wanted to take just a moment to address a couple of the specific concerns that were brought up, particularly as they relate to Denver, because I was deeply involved in the creation of the Denver Food Producing Animals Ordinance, particularly as it relates to the licensure. One thing I want to point out to address your specific concerns is that in Denver, it's not a goat license. It is a food producing animals license. Denver requires you to get a license for a chicken, a duck, or a goat. And that is a Denver solution, given Denver's culture and Denver's way of doing things. And here in Wheat Ridge, you can have chickens and ducks and a whole list of other things on there with absolutely no license at all. And that is the driving reason why we believe that dwarf goats, the Denver parallel does not apply in this case. If we're not going to license chickens and ducks in Wheat Ridge the way they do in Denver, there's absolutely no reason to license dwarf goats the way they do in Denver. Now, in Denver, there is no immunization requirement for dwarf goats to get your license. The license is not about public safety or the goat safety. Goats in Colorado are not required, they're recommended by vets to get a CD&T vaccination annually. And the CD&T is to protect against enterotoxemia and tetanus, which are problems for the goat, but they are not problems for the public. A big part of why dogs are licensed is because rabies is a public health issue. And that is the way that we can help ensure that these dogs are not going to be seriously harming people. And that is not, again, that is not a parallel issue for dwarf goats. In terms of the public outreach to city staff, I did just want to point out, even though Mr. Johnstone mentioned being contacted by a couple of people, there is public interest around this. We've been directing them to city council, Lucky City Council, and so I haven't been having them call city staff, and so city council has been receiving some queries about this, but that's where we've been sending folks. Bless you. And I think that I think that everything else was adequately addressed by Amanda here. But I am happy to answer any questions you may have. I don't want to talk on and on about the economic and environmental and health and food security benefits of goats, but I do teach backyard goat keeping at Denver Botanic Gardens, and I was the founding co-chair of the Denver Sustainable Food Policy Council, and I'm the author of The Complete Idiot's Guide to Urban Homesteading. So I'm very happy to answer any questions about this issue that you may have. Thank you so much for your time.
Does anybody have any question? Yes, Steve.
Thank you for that update. I just have 2 questions for you. One is, I guess, regarding vets. help me out. So there's a vet around, I don't know, 38th and Chase, and there's one at Harlan and 42nd. Would the average vet handle this type of animal, or do they have to go to a specialized vet?
I think it depends on the vet. My vet that I go to, she does primarily like horses and other livestock like goats, but my friend in Highlands who has dwarf goats in her backyard under the Denver FPA rules, she takes her goats, the vet's right there on 32nd, just like 2 blocks west of Highland Square. And she takes her goats in, and that vet feels comfortable to give the vaccinations. Goats actually require very little ongoing medical care. In fact, I could give my goat the vaccinations if I wanted to bother to get the CD&T.
But they need like an emergency care or something like that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So there are some vets that are in places like Genesee and Conifer,
Right.
and then other vets. This woman in Highlands is apparently ready to go and do it. So
Hopefully we won't have to go up to Conifer every.
So that's something that goat owners can work out, but we do have resources. I don't know where you may have a goat vet that's closer.
Down from Conifer.
Yeah, and they come down. They'll come down. Mine comes down too sometimes. Yeah.
And then my other question regards Nubian, infamous Nubians. So would you classify those as dwarfs, or would you as full size?
No, full-size goats, and as Mr. Johnstone mentioned, we're really targeting in for the purposes of backyard goat
Right.
keeping on Nigerian dwarf and African pygmy goats, which are very specific breeds. I personally don't know anyone who keeps Nubians in a backyard setting like we're talking about. And actually, to follow up on the noise issue, one thing I forgot to mention, which is one thing to think about with noise. Of course, any animal can make noise, but goats are a prey species. If they are afraid, if there's someone walking by, if something disturbs them, their instinct generally is to become very quiet, unlike a dog whose instinct is to become quite loud in those situations. So the fact that goats are a prey species in many ways makes them much more suitable for neighborhoods than a dog who is a predator species. Nothing against dogs. I have a dog, but I'm just saying.
As long as you don't have more than 3, right?
I've got a Chihuahua. The Chihuahua is by far the smallest animal that we own.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, and thanks again also. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I had one other. Could you just speak to the difference? Would it be worth us clarifying those 2 breeds?
I'm sorry.
As far as if in this regulation, dwarf goats such as, if there's concern about sort of, I'm just curious. I don't know enough about dwarf goats.
I'll tell you the truth. I did get feedback from a member of the Animal Commission who, and this was just a personal conversation we have, so it wasn't part of the public record, who was uncomfortable with the idea of really targeting in on specific breeds because she felt that was unnecessarily restrictive. That if what we're really talking about is an issue of size and impact, that really something more along the lines of under a weight of 75 pounds, for example, which would easily encompass, female and wether, which is a neutered male, Nigerian dwarf and African pygmy goats. But occasionally there are, things we don't know, like a Pygora. A Pygora is a cross between an Angora and a pygmy goat. So it's a way to raise a dwarf fiber goat, for example. But the point is whether it's a Pygora or a Nigerian dwarf, as long as it met the size requirements, why do we care? And in terms of that rare loud goat, for example, it's really no different than the rare loud dog, which is, which we have steps with our CSOs to deal with that. So I don't really see that we need to become overly restrictive. I think we just need to look in keeping with the spirit of what I found in Wheat Ridge. Moving from Denver to Wheat Ridge was like a breath of fresh air in some ways when I looked into the way you all seem to do things over here. So that's my opinion, since you asked for it. Yeah.
I appreciate that because a lot of people think that they are similar or that they're very, very different.
The Nigerian dwarf and African pygmy?
The dwarf goats versus full.
Oh yeah, they're wildly different.
You don't mistake.
Wildly different. I would never want to have full-size goats. That's not, no, thank you. I mean, I know you do it.
What's the average height of these dwarf?
Can I step away? I can show you because, I'll say the official thing is 17 to 19 inches, but that's measured at the shoulder. So it's hard. That's how they measure livestock, is at the shoulder. So they say 17 to 19 inches, but they come up to about here. That's where their head. In fact, when we go hiking, one of my goats is shy. If somebody comes up, she doesn't know, and she puts her forehead against my leg and it just rests move them. Yeah, I would never, no.
Any other?
With this ordinance, we're not specifying a weight, though. I mean, is it 75 pounds? Does that need to be put in here, or as a maximum, or should there be a maximum weight, or?
We've tried to kind of find some common ground. If you look at Section 3 of the ordinance, it modifies the definition sections of the zoning code, and it defines dwarf goats as
40 to 75
as this.
pounds.
So it says
Generally weigh, yeah.
dwarf goats generally weigh between 40 and 75 pounds and include breeds commonly known as Nigerian dwarf and African pygmy. So we're trying to put some kind of definition around it without limiting ourselves to specific breeds or saying absolutely if it's tipping the scales at 77 pounds, it's out of here. It needs to be relocated. So that was our approach.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in and staying through the other case. Appreciate it. Okay, can I close the public hearing? I close the public hearing. Okay, I'm open for a motion,
I'll make a motion.
please.
I move to recommend approval of the proposed ordinance amending various sections of Chapter 26 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning the keeping of dwarf goats.
Second.
Any discussion? Please vote.
Oh,
Oh,
yes.
yes.
I would just like to
Discussion.
say a few things. I just want to reiterate the whole idea of a lot of new people coming to Wheat Ridge are super excited about our openness to urban agriculture and food production. And I just think it's something we want to consider. And I also want to go over, because I know that some of you don't get as much interaction with animal control and with code violation as I might. And they are very persistent and in checking in on a lot of these things. And while we don't know the number of goats exactly in the city of Wheat Ridge, I'll bet code enforcement could give you some good averages on, meaning that they are keeping track of and checking to make sure that these minimum standards are cared for, both for the animal welfare, safety, and for complaints and things like this. And I just wanted to kind of relay my firsthand that they seem to be doing a very careful job of checking for these restrictions.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, please vote.
And that motion carries 5-1 with Commissioner Dorsey voting no.
Thank you for coming in. So we are moving on to the next case unless somebody needs a break. Okay, hearing none. Moving on. The next case is case number ZOA-14-04, an ordinance amending Chapter 26 and Chapter 11 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws by the addition of new Section 26-639 concerning marijuana and amending paragraph 11-321, Section B8, concerning applications for primary caregiver licenses. Does the next case go with this? Should they be both presented at the same time or not?
No, I think we'll do them separately.
Individually? Okay.
Try and
Then
be
I will stop
to
here.
the point, but there's somewhat discrete issues.
Okay, thank you.
So 2 ordinances tonight regarding the treatment of various marijuana-related uses in the city. We continue to kind of monitor the issue of marijuana in the state. It's a evolving regulatory environment at both the state level and for us at a local level as we try and be responsive to our experiences with how this is integrating into our state and local environment. So the first ordinance that's under consideration, and in the case of both of these ordinances, they were we were directed by council to initiate these changes. So the first relates to the residential growing of marijuana. And when I say marijuana in this context, it doesn't matter really whether it's recreational or medicinal. It would apply the same in this ordinance to both recreational and medicinal marijuana. So residents of Colorado obviously now have certain constitutional rights to grow and consume marijuana, and we are trying to be respectful of those at a local level, particularly on this front in terms of, I think communities have taken much different regulatory approaches when it comes to the commercial trade of medicinal and recreational marijuana, and that's what state law allows you to do. But this ordinance and our regulations of residential cultivation is really being responsive to the constitutional amendment. So we're very conscious of being compliant with that and making sure that people have the constitutional rights that have been given to them by the state of Colorado and the voters of Colorado based on the recent amendments in the last 10 or so years. So with that said, we are proposing to place certain limits on the manner in which marijuana is cultivated on residential properties. Again, consistent with people's constitutional rights to grow 6 plants and possess certain amounts of marijuana, but also in keeping with local zoning regulations, which place limits on many things we do, whether it be what animals you can keep, how many dogs you can have, how many accessory structures you can have, et cetera. So we think it's certainly very appropriate. So what we're proposing, and I would note that when we first adopted the medical marijuana regulations several years ago, and that included regulations pertaining to primary caregivers and what rules they would be subjected to, and we required at that time that they be subject to the same rules as any home occupation would be, because we thought it was really akin, even if it necessarily isn't for profit, that the impacts were akin to a home occupation. So what we're trying to do in this ordinance is really similar to that, is trying to carve out a new section of the code that pertains specifically to marijuana in a residential context, growing for personal consumption, and putting a limited set of rules around that that, again, are very similar, though not quite as extensive as the rules that apply to home occupations and primary caregivers. So some of the specific things, limited to 25% of the gross floor area of your house. So if you have a 1,000 square foot house, you could devote 250 square feet to the growing of marijuana. It must be conducted entirely indoors, so you can't do it outdoors or in an accessory structure. The cultivation can only be by and for the residents of the house. So unless it's being occupied as a primary caregiver, if you're growing marijuana on your property, it has to be within those state limits in terms of the number of plants, and it has to be for your own personal use and consumption. There can't be any visible evidence of the activity. This already is the case, but just for clarity, we're making it clear that you have to comply with all building and electrical codes. I would say one reason that we think it's appropriate to regulate this is because that's been one of our big issues, is that people have been, setting up residential cultivation facilities, in some cases that take up an entire house, and in many cases where they didn't get permits to, install or modify electrical, mechanical systems, and found really public safety issues that were of some significant concern. Hence, a primary motivation for this ordinance. And then again, just to reiterate, those same limitations would apply to primary caregivers. So if you're doing this not for your own consumption, if you're doing it for the number of patients that you're allowed to have as a primary caregiver under state law, you'd have those same limitations. So as a primary caregiver, it's probably somewhat more limiting to the extent that unless you have a larger house, you may not be able to accommodate a significant number of patients with an adequate amount of the product. But again, we feel that's completely appropriate to say, in Wheat Ridge, if you want to be a primary caregiver, you need to look for a larger property, a larger home, if you want to do that. So that's my spiel. The ordinance is scheduled for a city council public hearing on June 23rd. So next Monday, and whatever recommendation you forward this evening will certainly be forwarded to them for consideration.
Thank you. Ellen?
Thanks for preparing all of this. It seems pretty comprehensive. I just want to clarify the reason for not allowing cultivation in an accessory structure. Is that more of a is that a public safety issue as concerns theft, burglary, and that sort of thing?
I'd say that's a big part of it. Yeah.
Okay. I seem to remember we addressed or looked at that as a possibility back when we were addressing the medical marijuana issue.
Right. So when it comes to the commercial, if you will, ability to do marijuana growing, whether it be medicinal or recreational, you have the ability to get an additional license for cultivation. You're not required to, but you're allowed to. And we required that be adjacent to and contiguous was the word actually that we use to the retail outlet, so that there's not that public safety issue of kind of transport and security and just exposing whether it be the people that are conducting the business there or other members of the general public to the attractiveness of potentially capturing that product in transport.
And in a residential setting, it might present some crimes of opportunity. Someone notices
yes.
a greenhouse or a detached garage with, garage door windows and being able to see what's being cultivated in there. Is
Correct.
that the concern?
And
okay.
I think the presence of the mechanical systems that you'd have to install would be fairly apparent.
Sure.
And less apparent in a residential structure, the main structure. And those types of structures just tend to be less secure, given the fact that they're not occupied on a general basis.
Okay.
And they're not probably initially constructed to the same level of building code and electrical code. So they're probably, from a practical standpoint, more difficult to update to meet the system needs that you're going to have to do cultivation.
Okay, thanks.
Amanda?
What qualifies as visual? If I see the grow lights or what?
It's a good question. I don't know that we've had, to my knowledge, a lot of opportunity to. That language, not that this is a good reason, but that language is mirrored from the home occupation ordinance as well.
Okay.
So the intent is that you're maintaining the residential character of the neighborhood, that I could walk by your house and not know that you're doing whatever.
So that glowing light at night would be inappropriate to be emanating from your house?
I think that an argument can be made that would be the case.
Okay, that's one of the things that,
Yeah, because I think,
there are a couple houses in Wheat Ridge.
Putting my code enforcement hat on, if that was a concern that was raised and we went out there and saw
That'd be acceptable.
it can be addressed, right? Okay. So if it can be addressed, then they should do that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Emery?
I have no questions.
Scott? Oh, Steve.
No question.
Scott? I have a couple. So does the city, remind me please, it's late, does the city, I'll back this up. So when realtors define the square footage of a house, they do not include the basement. Does the city include the basement when they're talking about the square footage, the gross floor area of a dwelling unit?
We would if it's habitable. So if it meets applicable building codes in terms of ingress and egress, if it meets the applicable building codes as it pertains to minimum clearance heights in terms of ceilings, minimum clearance heights in terms of the stairwell that's accessing the space, then it's habitable and we would count it towards that gross floor area.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. So I I seem to think that 25% is a lot of space. Was there, could you just explain the thinking of 25% for 6 plants? I mean, do they get to be, I honestly wouldn't know how big they get to be, but do they get to be so big that 6 plants would take 25% of an average house? Or was this a?
Yeah. I mean, where did the number come from? It's the number we use in home occupation. So we think there's a lot of similarities between this type of activity, which is clearly not, residential in character. It's not a bedroom and a bathroom and a kitchen. I mean, I think the things that everyone associates with a residential structure. So that was really the rationale for it. I mean, I think it is a fair amount of space for 6 plants. I can't profess to be an expert, but, if you had that 1,000 square foot house, 250 square feet is a
room.
It's a pretty large room.
Yeah. Okay.
That would be devoted to it.
Okay.
If you have the 800 square foot house, it's going to be whatever that math is.
And then, so I believe, I'm guessing here, the reference to the use of compressed flammable gas for processing marijuana, is that for making hash?
It's definitely used for making products, right?
Product.
So somehow processing
Extraction.
the extractions of some sort, whether that be something like hash or something else that people have come up with of late. I mean, there's a lot of different types of kind of processes that are used now to manipulate the raw product. And there's been several examples, not necessarily in Wheat Ridge, but in the state and in the metro area, of some pretty significant accidents
Right.
that have been involved.
I've seen
in
them
that.
on the, okay. And then this kind of veers off of marijuana, but just to ask, so these regulations are great for marijuana, but do we have as tight a control? Well, I guess since the reason we have these is because marijuana is approved for use by citizens.
Right.
But we don't have these type of controls for things like meth, which is because it's illegal to produce it.
Right. I mean, it's a good question, and it's come up from other people as well. Have asked the same question, and you answered it correctly. Right? Is that nothing associated with any other Class 1 narcotic is legal, whether it be harboring it, producing it. So it's to regulate it would well, in one sense, you can say, well, why don't we? Is you don't need to, right? I mean, when you see that
Because it's
happening,
illegal.
it's just say you can't do that, right? And here's your, felony, whatever citation. So.
Okay. And so if, let's assume that with whatever tweaking is applicable, that this motion goes in and city council approves, then becomes a code violation? Like any other code violation? If people have 7 plants or 20 plants or whatever plants, then
3 goats, 6 plants.
3 goats, 6 plants. But if they have more than that, then code enforcement would go in and remove the plants that were in excess of their 6 plants? I'm just trying to figure out what the code enforcement would be on this.
I mean, we've been making the interpretation currently that even without this ordinance, that we believe that this 25%. I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation that in the initial medical marijuana ordinance, we had placed a limitation on primary caregivers of you have to comply with the accessory use regulations, and they actually have to. As part of their application to get a license as a primary caregiver, they have to acknowledge that they will comply with those. And that will stay in the code. That remains in the code for primary caregivers. But based on that being in the code, we've actually been making the interpretation that these things that we're proposing here generally already apply to residential cultivation. And so we've taken that position with several property owners who've exceeded this. And it's just like any other code enforcement violation. They get cited into the administrative hearing process. If we feel the building is unsafe to occupy because of electrical or mechanical modifications, we'll post the building unsafe to occupy and make sure that it's not occupied. So Yep, I mean, it can take quite a bit of time from a code enforcement standpoint when these cases up, and we've probably had at least a half a dozen where we've had to take some sort of action.
Okay, and then here's the last question. I'm going back to the use of compressed flammable gas. So some creative person out there is going to figure out another way of processing marijuana that doesn't require compressed flammable gas. Should that statement or the way that it's lined out, should that be broadened to say use of compressed flammable gas or any other tool or mechanism for processing marijuana? I'm just asking.
I might
Because
wanna.
I know that the idea of using a 2-liter bottle for producing meth was not thought of 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. I
I
probably.
think I could shed some light on this too. In our previous case, I mentioned that actually the state of Colorado has a code about solvents, and one of the solvents is CO2 extraction. And so there's a lot of information on that, on CO2 extraction, but I'm not seeing it covered in here, so you can't use the flammable solvents, but it doesn't, but in here when it says marijuana, it says as used means all parts, and it says the resin extracted. So basically my understanding is it says you can extract it, you just can't use flammable solvents.
That's why I asked
But
if
you
we
could
broaden.
use CO2 solvents, which is permissible, but there's a lot of code with the state of Colorado to be compliant with CO2 extractions.
So is your point that you're suggesting that we do broaden this?
I think I would say any solvents.
Because
You
it's
could
a
even-
safety issue, right?
It
Any
is a
solvents?
safety issue,
Okay.
yes.
Well, I just.
Such as
It's
CO2.
not necessarily a bad suggestion, and I'd be curious to hear what everyone thinks, because obviously it's yours to make a recommendation, but I would be cautious hearing you say that the state regulates it. I mean, there's certain things that local jurisdictions can do in this regulatory environment, certain things we can't. And people are allowed to use processes to manipulate marijuana into different products. So that's a constitutional right. You can cultivate, you can also produce other products for your personal consumption. So I'm just sensitive to putting something in the ordinance or recommending something in the ordinance that would be in violation of constitutional law. So we thought we went as far as we could, I think, in terms of the public safety issue of using those products in a residential environment, but I'm not sure, I don't know the answer. I'm not sure how much further we could go and not be in conflict with constitutional law.
Okay, I'm good. I was just, whenever I see something that's so specific like compressed flammable gas, and some creative person out there is going to come up with the
Right.
next great extraction method, and then we'll just revisit the code, I guess.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for handling my questions. Any other? Okay, so with that, we have nobody in the audience to speak. I guess I will close the public hearing, and I am looking for a motion.
Madam Chair, I move to recommend approval of the proposed ordinance amending Chapters 26 and 11 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws by the addition of a new section 26-639 concerning marijuana and amending paragraph 11-321 subsection B subsection 8 concerning applications for primary caregiver licenses.
I'll second the motion.
Any comments? Please vote.
That carries 6-0.
Okay, moving quickly on. Case number ZOA-14-05, an ordinance amending sections 11-305, 11-416, and 26-204 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws to prohibit the location of medical marijuana-infused products manufacturers and the retail marijuana products manufacturers in the C1 zone district, to impose distance requirements between such manufacturers and certain specified land uses, and to harmonize other distance requirements for retail and medical marijuana establishments, and repealing the temporary moratorium on all city action relating to new medical marijuana-infused products manufacturer and retail marijuana products manufacturer applications.
A mouthful.
Yes, indeed.
So this is the second ordinance pertaining to marijuana, and as stated, this pertains to the manufacturing of marijuana infused products, or what are commonly referred to in the industry as simply MIPS. If you're okay with that nomenclature, I'll use that. There is actually a moratorium that was adopted by council on April 28th out of concern or potential concern and a desire to look at the regulatory environment as it applies to MIPS within the city of Wheat Ridge. Pending applications were exempted, and there was actually one application for a business license that was pending at the time, and that was allowed to be processed. So MIPS are currently, whether it be for recreational product or for medicinal product, they're currently allowed in both the IE, the Industrial Employment Zone District, and also the C1 Zone District. And that really goes for all the marijuana-related commercial uses. When we originally adopted these regulations, we adopted them as such that the various classes of marijuana-related uses were all allowed in both C1 and IE. Commercial 1 being generally a less intensive zone district than IE in terms of the types of uses that are allowed and the locations where it's placed. So C1, you're going to see that potentially adjacent to residential in more instances. It's just a much more common zoning district within the city. IE is probably most common on the I-70 corridor, and more particularly on the north side of I-70, where you see more of our industrial and some at least of our larger employers, such as Coors Bottling. So again, MIPS are currently allowed and in those zone districts, and they're not subject to any separation requirements. So for retail stores, again, whether it be medical or recreational, for retail stores and cultivation facilities, they're required to be separated a minimum of 1,000 feet from certain specified uses, namely schools, daycares, drug and alcohol treatment centers, and college campuses. They're required to be a minimum of 1,000 feet from those uses. And then similarly, or related to that, they're required to be separated by 3/4 of a mile from each other. So if there's a established retail store for marijuana sales, medical and medicinal, you can't locate another retail store within 3/4 of a mile of that store. And that, again, does not apply to MIPS. So potentially under the existing regulatory environment, you could have two different MIPS manufacturing product, right next door, but not associated with each other. So we have, again, reviewed this ordinance preliminarily with City Council at a study session. What we've brought before you is kind of generally following what policy guidance they gave us at that time. And I'll just, again, go through just a few of the things that we're proposing to modify in terms of the regulatory environment in the city as it applied to the manufacturing of marijuana-infused products. So it restricts any new locations be established in the C1 zone district. So I think the thinking at this point is, with subject to Planning Commission discussion, obviously, is that it is more of a manufacturing type of activity. They can be fairly intensive. We'll actually be classifying as a hazardous occupancy. At least that's what's being proposed as part of our 2012 code adoptions. So that's kind of the most intensive occupancies associated with, manufacturing types of uses that use, more dangerous products or processes. So we think that could make quite a bit of sense as to the MIPS, can't just go in a typical C1 retail center. Similar to or identical, I should say, to the current regulations pertaining to retail marijuana stores, we're proposing in the ordinance that MIPS would be separated by that same minimum 1,000 feet from schools, daycares, drug and alcohol treatment facilities, and college campuses. Next, we're proposing a somewhat smaller separation requirement, but the idea behind the separation requirement, I think, is essentially being separated from each other is, we're trying to reasonably meet the demand, or what we perceive to be the demand in our community, and not necessarily become a mecca for this business, just like we don't necessarily want to become a mecca for any one other type of business. We want to accommodate the industry, but not necessarily be overly permissive. So there's a proposed separation of 1/4 mile between different MIPS, so a slightly lesser standard compared to the 3/4 of a mile that's required for separation between retail stores. I would note that I think our experience with MIPS is because they don't have a retail component. I mean, this is a manufacturing facility, potentially with cultivation as well, but it's not a retail center. Not to say that you couldn't have both under one license, but if you had the retail center, it would be subject to the 3/4 of a mile separation. The reason I bring that up is just a MIP on its own, if it's not selling any retail product, and it's just strictly manufacturing for as a kind of a wholesaler to go to other retail stores, they're not necessarily particularly visible. Kind of like a testing facility, there's no real good reason for them to really make themselves known. So you're not, as a community member, while there may be other impacts such as odors, there isn't necessarily that kind of in-your-face visual impact of, I'm here, because they probably don't really want to have a big visible presence. So the 1/4 mile separation is what's being proposed. There are some clarifications in terms of how some of the distances are measured when it pertains to the 3/4 of a mile requirements, as well as the 1,000-foot requirements. So that's really just clarifications in our mind. And as we normally would do, the ordinance does treat existing MIPS that might violate any of these new regulations in terms of the separations in particular, or the zoning fundamentally would be classified as legally non-conforming uses, so it does make that clear in the ordinance as well. And that's my summary.
I'll start this side. Ellen?
Just to clarify, this would only regulate distances between MIPS and not restrict the location of any testing facilities?
Correct.
Okay.
Amanda?
Is there any consideration for things like odor when we get into manufacturing? I've just noticed that the odor on the east side of the city the dog food plant has now been superseded by marijuana smell. So
right, there is.
Okay,
We
cool.
think that's really one of the motivations behind behind proposing, and we're not quite there yet, but we're scheduled to be in front of City Council in, I think, the first study session in August to talk about the 2012 code adoption. One of the things that the proposal to classify them as a hazardous occupancy does require different air handling and mechanical systems.
Right.
So that's one of our motivators there, is that we think we can get a better handle on the odor issues by treating them that way.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Emery?
I have no questions.
Steve?
The C1 zone district, is that the city's most permissive commercial zone district?
Well, I'd say IE is our most, it depends on what you mean by commercial, right?
Okay.
So commercial in the sense of kind of retail office.
Right, a retail office.
There's actually C2, which is even more permissive,
Okay.
but we have very little of it.
Okay.
So C1 is very common, and yes, it would be our most permissive commercial zoning district in terms of retail, office, a little bit of real light industrial.
Okay.
And then going up from there, you go into IE, where you're allowed more traditional industrial uses.
And this particular map that was in our packet with the three circled areas, are those all three sites currently zoned C1?
I think
Because it looks like they're not purple.
Yeah, I think at least one of those is. I thought at least one of those was IE, but
So would the ones that aren't, would they become then legal non-conforming?
yes.
Okay. And then, I guess that's, oh, and then usually council doesn't pass emergency ordinances unless there's obviously pressure. Was staff getting a lot of inquiries or potential applications coming in? That, what triggered it from a staff, ultimate city council perspective?
In terms of pursuing the emergency on the moratorium?
Yeah, versus just letting the process just take its course.
Yeah, I think that we were seeing quite a bit of additional interest in these types of uses.
The word was getting out that Wheat Ridge potentially I guess. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
I think that's a very
Fair
real
assessment.
potential.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Scott?
The only question I have is on this map. It says that the map shows locations of active or pending manufacturers as of April 28, 2014. But in the lower right-hand corner, it says it was revised on May 21st, 2014. My question is why does it not show the pending MIP manufacturer, the case number WZ1404? I think that was the correct one, located at the 3924 to 4096 Youngfield Street, which was sort of
The testing facility?
Oh, is that not a MIP manufacturer?
It's different, right? So
Okay.
the testing facility is a separate use class at both the state and the local level.
Okay.
And they would not be doing any manufacturing pursuant to state law. It's strictly testing for THC levels, other, public safety kind of issues.
Distribution, remember they were talking about figuring out ways of distribution, like patches and stuff like that?
Thank you. That's all I had.
I have a question, looking at it from the standpoint of a property owner. So I'm looking at the map, and if we take one of those gray little circles, and we go from right to left, the purple area that is currently doesn't have a gray circle around it because of the locations of drug treatment centers close by, it doesn't look like a MIP could go there. So a potential property owner could say that the city is, you've pretty much targeted only one area of town. The top left area of town is the only area that could actually have a MIP, because the other purple area that's kind of standalone, kind of middle right, if you put that quarter-mile buffer around it, you're sitting on top of drug treatment or daycare center. I can't tell which color, I think one of each,
Right.
which means that they couldn't do it there. The little purple area between the two MIPS they would be superimposed or conflicting, so it can't go there. So the only other area is the one in the top left, correct? Is that how I'm reading this?
Not exactly. There's the quarter mile is measured straight line radial distance, right? So it's fairly easy to map in terms of pulling that map out of GIS with essentially a buffer map.
Yeah.
The 1,000-foot separation from schools, daycares, et cetera, is measured, it's 1,000 feet, and it's measured by the most direct pedestrian route.
Okay.
And that's more challenging to map. It's more case by case. So,
Okay.
but that 1,000 feet is somewhat less than the quarter mile. So if you look at that kind of, I'm not good with my geometry, but whatever that shape is, kind of middle right of the map, which I
Right.
think is where you were speaking
Right.
to.
Yep.
North of the creek,
Yep.
that's zoned IE. I think there's probably some,
Potential?
given the lack of pedestrian connectivity up there, you're going to run out of 1,000 feet from those blue dots on the map
Okay.
pretty quickly. So I don't think, with the exception of kind of the west portion of that larger purple area,
Right.
you probably could find some sites in there that are not within that 1,000 feet of the whatever those are, schools or drug treatment facilities. I think they're schools or
Okay. But based on that, do we have reciprocal with our, I'm assuming that's Arvada. Do we respect their, let's assume that they have a quarter-mile buffer and they've got a school just on the other side of our city limits?
Yes.
Would we respect that? We would, okay.
Our separation requirements don't, and the same is true at the state level, because they also have some separation requirements. They're blind to municipal boundaries.
Okay, perfect, okay. Okay, thank you for explaining that. I didn't have any other questions. Again, my only concern was being so very specific on the language around flammable gases, et cetera. I just was asking if we needed to get more broad on there, and I understand the concerns of not going there because it might interact badly with the state, so I'll defer to staff's judgment on that one. That was my only question. Does anybody have any follow-up questions? Okay. So then, nobody in the audience, close the public hearing. I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. Hold on, I think I'm reading the wrong one here. Give me a minute. All right. I move to recommend approval of the proposed ordinance amending sections 11-305, 11-416, and 26-204 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws to prohibit the location of medical marijuana-infused products manufacturers and retail marijuana products manufacturers in the C1 zone district, to impose distance requirements between such manufacturers and certain specified land uses, to harmonize other distance requirements for retail and medical marijuana establishments, and repealing the temporary moratorium on all city action relating to new medical marijuana-infused products manufacturers and retail marijuana products manufacturers' applications.
Second. We have a first and a second. Any comments, discussions? I just will say I can't believe we're having to talk about this. I just never thought I'd be the day.
Charting new ground.
Yeah. Okay, with that, please vote.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, so we are on to other items in our agenda.
I don't think anything from.
Do we have a case next week? Any cases next week? Or at the beginning of the month? July 3rd?
No, we didn't have a quorum for that meeting, so we will have a case on July 17th, a subdivision application, assuming we can get a quorum for that meeting.
Okay. Okay.
And we kind of knew it would be suspect to get a quorum on that date, so we'd let the applicant know long in advance that, we'd penciled that in, but, there's no guarantees, so.
Okay.
But they should be moving forward on the 17th.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, I would love a motion to adjourn. Oh, sorry.
I'll do that. That's a motion. Let's have a motion to adjourn.
And I'll second it.
Please vote.
That carries 6-0.
You picked a hell of a night to,
Yeah, I'm going to let Kim know I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bruce.